Living expenses? What does that entail? My mother-in-law's expression reflected genuine confusion. Hey, Brian, can you explain this properly? I pressed, watching my husband squirm. Brian, caught between his mother and me, seemed to shrink under the pressure. I've never received anything like that before, he finally admitted. Let me introduce myself. I'm Carol, a 37-year-old office worker happily married to Brian. Our whirlwind romance led us to tie the knot within 4 months of meeting each other. Our families were thrilled, especially given our ages. Since our marriage, my relationship with my mother-in-law had blossomed. We often dined out and grew quite close. Initially, Brian and I lived separately but nearby. However, after Brian's father passed away, we decided to live together. Contrary to stereotypes, there was no tension with my mother-in-law. She willingly took on household chores, giving me time to focus on work. I felt guilty but appreciated her help. To show my gratitude, I provided her with some living expenses through Brian. Yet as Brian's appetite grew, I worried about whether our budget was sufficient. So, I broached the topic with him, suggesting we increase the allowance for his mother. I think we should increase the living expenses we give to your mom, I said, especially considering how much you've been eating lately and she's been doing all the cooking and cleaning. Brian seemed hesitant but eventually agreed, sharing my sentiment about showing appreciation tangibly. As I nodded in approval, little did I know that life was about to take an unexpected turn. Just a short while later, I found myself in a severe accident after colliding with a bike at an intersection. I found myself hospitalized for 2 weeks due to a fractured bone. On the first day, my husband brought me some essentials. Are you okay? It looks painful. I'll let my mom know, he said. That would be great, thanks, I replied. In my shared hospital room, I couldn't make calls, so I asked my husband to inform his mother that I'd contact her once I was able to move. Sure, I got it, he cheerfully responded before heading home. A week went by, and neither my husband nor my mother-in-law showed up. Despite my expectations, there was no contact from either of them. Concern gnawed at me, but I reassured myself, thinking it was just my husband being his usual forgetful self. Then, I tried calling. My husband didn't answer, which I chalked up to him being busy at work. Next, I rang my mother-in-law. Hi, mother-in-law. You must have heard from Brian, but I'll be in the hospital for another week, so I'll need some fresh clothes, I said. Hospitalized? What happened? An injury? Illness? Her flustered response made me uneasy. As I pondered, I realized she hadn't been informed. But why? If my husband forgot, she would have noticed my absence and called me immediately. Minutes later, she arrived, visibly exhausted. She explained Brian's absence, mentioning a sudden 2-week business trip. Thank you for coming, mother-in-law. What did you hear from Brian? I asked. He said he was going on a business trip for 2 weeks. It was sudden, she replied. That's when it hit me. Brian, an illustrator who preferred working from home, planned a sudden business trip. It didn't add up. Unless something significant arose, he wouldn't leave, even for local meetings. My mind raced with possibilities, including the unsettling thought that he might be cheating on me. I know for a fact that our company doesn't arrange meetings requiring business trips. How? Well, it's simple. I work there too, as an administrative staff member. Are you okay? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? My mother-in-law asked, concern etched on her face. Our company wouldn't send Brian on a business trip. That's the job of the sales team. I'm an admin, so I don't go on business trips either, I explained, watching her reaction. Her puzzled expression spoke volumes. In other words, Brian lied. It had been a week since his unexplained absence and there was no official notification. I couldn't help but wonder where he really was. He left his injured wife in the hospital and lied to me. Did Brian tell you where he was going on business? I inquired. Come to think of it, he mentioned staying in a hotel in Miami arranged by the company, my mother-in-law replied, pulling up the hotel's website on her smartphone. As I glanced at the screen, my heart sank. It was the same hotel where we celebrated our wedding anniversary, a place far too extravagant for a company-funded trip. A throbbing headache began to surface, fueled by the realization of Brian's sloppy alibi. Mother-in-law, this is difficult to say, but Brian might be cheating, I confessed. What? Brian? Her disbelief echoed in the room. But this does seem suspicious, she conceded, her expression shifting. Isn't this the hotel? Hold on, let's confirm if he's really there, she suggested, disappearing for a moment. After what felt like an eternity, she returned, a smirk playing on her lips. They said they'll check it out for me first. We need to verify the facts, she announced. As we waited, about 10 anxious minutes passed by. When I received a call from my mother-in-law, the news was shocking. Brian, my husband, seemed to be spending the night at that hotel, and with another woman, no less. Despite the strict policies against such actions, the circumstances seemed to warrant an exception, my mother-in-law explained. She even disclosed the name of the woman Brian was with. I was taken aback when I heard the name. I knew her. She was actually a friend of mine, my coworker and friend Jessica, who worked in the same department as Brian. She had even been present at our wedding, delivering a speech. The revelation left my mother-in-law equally astonished. Furious, her face flushed bright red, my mother-in-law was ready to confront Brian then and there. However, I urged caution, suggesting we gather solid evidence first. We decided to hire a private detective. After that, I'm filing for divorce. I can't tolerate a man who cheats with my friend. I plan to seek alimony, so I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause you, mother-in-law, I explained. Don't worry about it. I'll give that idiot son of mine a piece of my mind. How dare he betray such a good wife? When he comes back, he'll get a thrashing, my mother-in-law declared angrily, her words offering me some solace. Feeling somewhat uplifted by her support, I began searching for a private detective. A relative of my mother-in-law recommended a reputable detective agency, and I promptly hired them. When I received the report, I couldn't help but laugh. It turned out that my friend Jessica had been posing as Brian's wife while they were away on location, 3 days before my scheduled discharge from the hospital. I dialed Brian's number, keeping it a secret that my mother-in-law was aware of the situation. How are you feeling? I inquired. I'm sorry, I've been too busy to visit. I'll definitely pick you up on your discharge day. Do you need anything? He responded. No, I'm fine. Sorry for bothering you while you're so busy. Apparently, my recovery is taking longer, so my discharge date has been extended. I'm just calling to let you know. I'm borrowing things like pajamas from the hospital, so no need to worry. Looks like I'll be discharged a week from now, I explained. Sorry for not being able to support you while you're so busy. Oh, could you withdraw money for the hospital bills? I don't have any cash on hand, so could you do it on my discharge day? I requested. I see, that sounds tough. Alright, I should be done with my delivery in a week, so I'll go to the bank before picking you up. My mom's been worried too. She's caught a cold and feels bad for not being able to visit you. Brian lied effortlessly. Suppressing a laugh at his fabrications, I replied, Oh, is that so? Please tell mother-in-law to take care. Did you manage to inform the office? Thank you. Did they say anything about allowances? He asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. They did. I'll take care of the procedures. You just rest and recover. Hope you get well soon. All right, thank you. See you in a week then, I replied, ending the call. Already aware of Brian's deception, I had confirmed with the office before his call. Apparently, he had informed them that he was going on a trip and applied for my leave. As a result, my boss inquired about the trip and my well-being. After explaining my situation, my boss decided to visit the hospital immediately. Not only my boss but also the HR department came, revealing that I was entitled to sick leave benefits. It was then revealed that Brian had been out of touch for about a week, and he was also behind on his deadlines. The same was true for his mistress, who they couldn't reach either. This revelation shed light on a situation that had been ongoing for the past 6 months, finally coming to a head, prompting them to come and talk to me. I informed my bosses that I preferred they didn't mention the situation to Brian or his mistress until a week later. After that, they were free to impose any necessary punishment. Following the plan, I was discharged from the hospital. It appeared that Brian had submitted another application for my paid leave. His mother, my mother-in-law, received a call from him, stating that his business trip was extended. Despite my extended hospital stay due to my illness, he was prolonging his vacation with his mistress. It became evident that there was no love left for me, leaving me feeling saddened. Deciding to take my paid leave as initially planned, my boss assured me to take all the time I needed until Brian returned. My mother-in-law and I prepared ourselves to confront him. The day before I intended to inform Brian about my discharge from the hospital, I called him. Hello, how's your mother doing? I inquired. I'm feeling good and I got discharged today. It was sudden, so don't worry about picking me up. I can pay with my credit card, he replied. You're working today, right, Brian? I pressed. Yeah, I have a meeting soon and another one tonight, so I won't be home until late. Sorry, he said. That's fine, don't worry about it. I'll take a taxi home, I assured him. Suppressing a laugh at the background noise of a shopping center announcement during his call, I calmly hung up the phone and activated the voice recorder. I had received word from the detective that Brian planned to go shopping today, so I deliberately called him during that time. Upon checking the voice recorder, Brian's voice and the background announcement were distinctly captured. Apparently, Brian had contacted my mother-in-law, claiming he was on vacation with a friend. He'd insisted it was a working vacation, a sort of half-truth, and mentioned I had given my approval, omitting the details of my hospitalizations to spare her worry. Brian's absurd excuses left me chuckling. According to the detective, Brian had boarded a late-night flight back. My mother-in-law and I laid out all the evidence, awaiting Brian's return. However, Brian called me with a different story. Sorry, the meeting ran late and I missed the last train. I'll be back on the first train tomorrow, he said. Is that so? That's tough. Got it. Sorry, I can't pick you up, I replied calmly before ending the call. After indulging in a 3-week affair trip, it seemed Brian still couldn't get enough. My mother-in-law was furious, but I found that my love for Brian had vanished entirely, allowing me to maintain composure during our discussion. The next day, Brian returned home looking exhausted, laden with souvenirs. You went on a trip, I stated flatly. I didn't hear about that, I said, puzzled. Ha, didn't I tell you? Sorry, my bad. I got friendly with a client, and they invited me. Business relationships matter, right? Brian explained casually as he handed me a bag and followed me to the living room. I'm home. Hey, what's up with you, Mom? You look scary, Brian said, grinning as he plopped down onto a chair. He seemed to believe his mother was on his side. However, as soon as he saw the documents laid out on the table, his face drained of color. Sitting next to my mother-in-law, I pointed at a photo. Oh yes, you seem to have had quite the fun on your trip with Jessica, leaving your injured wife for 3 weeks. Were you in a honeymoon mood? I asked pointedly. What? What's this, Carol? Stop fooling around, Brian stammered, his face contorting in disbelief. Unfortunately, it wasn't a joke. I presented evidence from a private detective. You were pretty careless, weren't you? Your dinner conversations were totally bugged. Staying at a hotel run by our relatives, you must have thought you wouldn't get caught. Brian's face turned even more shocked as he looked at his mother for help. Mom, it was a lapse in judgment, he tried to explain. A lapse in judgment that lasted 3 weeks seems a bit too long, don't you think? His mother interjected with a cheerful smile. Brian, who had been hoping for help, was stunned. Here, these are documents for a claim for damages and a divorce application. Fill it out now, I instructed firmly. Damages? Divorce? Carol, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. The one I truly love is you. Can't you forgive me? Let's start over, Brian pleaded. In response, I pressed a button on my phone, and the voices of Brian and Jessica flowed out. It was a conversation recorded by the detective, hinting at a divorce with me and a remarriage with Jessica. Brian's face turned even paler. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. I didn't mean it, Brian mumbled, looking desperate. I couldn't care less, really, I replied, handing him the documents and urging him to write. Please forgive me. I can't afford to pay any damages. Well, that's what happens when you splurge like that. Where did all that money come from anyway? I asked pointedly. Brian mumbled something incoherent, and I had a bad feeling about it. You didn't by chance use the living expenses, did you? I have been giving you money to pass on to mother-in-law. Did you? You've been passing it on to her, right? I asked Brian, expecting confirmation. However, the response I got wasn't from Brian, but from mother-in-law herself. Living expenses? What are you talking about? I've never received anything like that, she said, seeming genuinely unaware. Confused, I turned to Brian. Hey, what's going on here? Explain it properly, I demanded. Mother-in-law and I confronted Brian, who seemed to shrink under our scrutiny. I'm sorry, the living expenses, I used them for our dates, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I felt my already icy affection for Brian grow even colder. He had spent the almost $2,000 I had been giving him every month. All of it. I told you that money was for groceries, utilities, and to thank mother-in-law. That money was mine in the first place, I reminded him, my voice tinged with disappointment. I'm sorry, my salary alone wasn't enough, Brian offered weakly, but it was clear what wasn't enough. The designer items Jessica had. Surely, there must have been gifts from Brian. I swiftly raised my hand to reprimand him, but it was stopped by mother-in-law. Brian watched hopefully, still thinking mother-in-law was on his side. You can't, Carol. If you lay a hand, it'll be to your disadvantage, mother-in-law warned before turning to face Brian. Then, with calm and monotone demeanor, mother-in-law delivered her verdict. I've always thought the sillier the child, the cuter. I've spoiled you too much. Even with the bias, you grew up kind, and your father and I were so happy when you got such a good wife. But now, I'm cutting ties with you. Brian, stunned, tried to protest, but Mom, you're joking, right? Mother-in-law slapped away Brian's pleading hand and handed him a document containing a clause renouncing inheritance. Brian widened his eyes in disbelief, muttering, I can't believe it. It doesn't matter if you can't believe it. It's all true, mother-in-law stated firmly. Dejected and seemingly out of arguments, Brian signed all the documents presented. Afterwards, mother-in-law kicked Brian out. He had apparently been misusing company entertainment expenses and was claimed for reimbursement by the company. Brian ended up living in an apartment without a bath, forced into a poor lifestyle after paying alimony and facing reimbursement claims. I claimed alimony from his mistress, Jessica, who, as it turned out, was married. Her husband was away on business, so I contacted him through social media and claimed alimony. As a result, Jessica avoided divorce but had to quit her job, forced to live with her husband's family in a rural area without internet connection, where she was made to work from dawn till dusk. Having lost my parents early, I ended up being adopted by mother-in-law. Initially reluctant because of Brian's infidelity, mother-in-law eventually accepted, and we sold the house, buying a new one just for the two of us. I want to take good care of mother-in-law until the end.
My name is Olivia. I'm a 30-year-old woman who loves numbers and planning. I have a good job and a stable life. People always said I was good with numbers. This skill has helped me a lot in life. But everything changed when I met Michael. I first saw Michael at a party. I don't usually go to parties, but my friend Sarah convinced me. Come on, Olivia, you need to get out more, she had said. At the party, I was standing alone, holding a drink, when Michael walked up to me. He was tall and had a smile that made people feel at ease. Hi, I'm Michael. I don't think we've met, he said, extending his hand. I shook his hand. I'm Olivia. So, Olivia, what brings you here? He asked. I shrugged. My friend dragged me here. I'm not much of a party person. Neither am I, Michael laughed. But sometimes it's good to get out of your comfort zone. We talked for a while. Michael was easy to talk to. He listened to me and made me laugh. He told me about his job at a local bookstore and his love for old movies. I told him about my job as an accountant and my love for puzzles. As the night went on, we found ourselves sitting away from the crowd, lost in our conversation. It was strange. We were so different, yet we connected so easily. When the party ended, Michael asked for my number. I'd like to see you again, Olivia. Maybe we can go for coffee? I hesitated, but then nodded. Sure, that would be nice. We started seeing each other after that night. We went on dates, watched movies, and talked for hours. Michael was charming and kind. He made me feel special. But there was one thing that bothered me. Michael didn't plan much. He lived in the moment, which was the opposite of me. I loved to plan everything. It made me feel in control. One day, I brought this up. Michael, don't you think you should plan more? It's important to have a plan. Michael just smiled. Olivia, I like the way I live. Planning is good, but sometimes you have to just go with the flow. I didn't understand it, but I liked him too much to argue. Months passed, and our relationship grew stronger. One evening, Michael took me to a quiet spot by the river. It was a beautiful night. The stars were out, and the air was fresh. Olivia, Michael said, turning to me, I love you. I know we're different, but I think that's what makes us special. Will you marry me? I was shocked. Marriage was a big step, but looking into Michael's eyes, I saw sincerity and love. Yes, Michael, I'll marry you, I said. And that's how my life took a turn. I, Olivia, the woman who loved numbers and planning, was going to marry Michael, the charming, easygoing man who lived in the moment. It was unexpected, but sometimes life is like that. It surprises you when you least expect it. When Michael and I decided to get married, I imagined a small wedding, just close family and friends, a simple ceremony, and maybe a dinner afterward. But things didn't go as I had imagined. We met each other's parents to share the news. My parents liked Michael right away. "He's a simple, honest man," my dad said, shaking Michael's hand. Michael's parents, on the other hand, seemed relieved. "It's good you found someone serious," his mom, Margaret, said with a sigh. As we started planning the wedding, Michael and I sat down with our parents. "I was thinking of a small wedding," I began, looking at Michael for support. He nodded in agreement, but Margaret had other ideas. "Oh no, dear. Michael is our only son. We must have a big wedding. All our friends and family should come. It needs to be grand." I tried to protest, but Margaret, that's not what we want. Michael, however, didn't support me. "Mom knows best, Olivia. Let's do what she wants." So the wedding planning began. It was nothing like what I had wanted. The guest list kept growing. Strangers I had never met were invited. The venue was huge, the decorations were extravagant, and everything was over the top. One day, while tasting cakes, I tried to talk to Michael. "This is too much, Michael. This isn't what we wanted." But Michael just shrugged. "It's just one day, Olivia. Let's make everyone happy." The wedding day arrived. I stood in a dressing room, wearing a dress that was too big and too fancy. Sarah was there, trying to cheer me up. "You look beautiful, Olivia." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I just wish this was different." As I walked down the aisle, I saw so many faces, most of which I didn't recognize. The ceremony was a blur. I said, "I do," but my heart was heavy. The reception was even worse. Loud music, too many people, and Margaret hovering around, making sure everything was as she wanted. At one point, I stepped outside for some air. Michael found me. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. "This isn't what I wanted, Michael. This isn't us." Michael took my hand. "I know, Olivia, but it's just one day. We have our whole lives ahead of us." I wanted to believe him, but standing there, surrounded by a celebration that felt more like an ordeal, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake. I loved Michael, but our wedding, something that was supposed to be about us, had turned into something unrecognizable, and that worried me. The days after the wedding were supposed to be happy, but they weren't. Michael and I settled into our new life, but something had changed. And then, Margaret came into the picture in a way I hadn't expected. It was a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there with a suitcase. "Margaret, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" I asked, confused. "Oh dear, I thought Michael told you. I'm staying with you for a while. My house is being renovated," she said, pushing past me. I was stunned. Michael hadn't mentioned anything. I called him at work. "Michael, why didn't you tell me your mom was staying with us?" "Oh, I forgot. It's just for a few weeks, Olivia. It's not a big deal," he said casually. But it was a big deal. Margaret didn't just stay with us. She took over our lives. She had opinions on everything, what we ate, how we cleaned, and especially how we spent our money. One evening, I came home to find Margaret sitting at the kitchen table with our bills spread out in front of her. "What are you doing, Margaret?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm looking at your expenses. You're spending too much. As a family, we need to save," she said, not looking up. I was shocked. "Margaret, these are our personal finances. It's not your place." Margaret finally looked at me. "As your mother-in-law and an elder, it is my place. I'm just trying to help." I wanted to argue, but I knew it wouldn't help. I walked away, feeling frustrated and invaded. The situation got worse. Margaret criticized everything I did. One Saturday, I was making breakfast when she walked into the kitchen. "You're making pancakes? That's too many carbs. You should make something healthier," she said, frowning. I took a deep breath. "Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I can make my own decisions about what I eat." She tutted. "I'm just saying, a wife should take care of her health, I felt my anger rising. But before I could say anything, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother is telling me how to cook now," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Michael looked uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe you should let Olivia do her thing." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Fine, but don't blame me if things go wrong." That night, I tried to talk to Michael. "I can't live like this. Your mother is controlling everything." Michael sighed. "She's just trying to help Olivia. She's old and set in her ways." "But this is our home, Michael. We should make our own decisions," I argued. Michael didn't say anything. He just went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had reached my limit with Margaret's constant meddling and criticism, especially regarding our finances. It was time to take a stand. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, I decided to bring up the subject. "Margaret, I've been thinking," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. "How about we do an experiment? For 1 month, let's keep separate budgets for our expenses. Then we can compare and see who's more efficient with money." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "An experiment? Interesting. You think you can manage better than me?" I nodded. "Yes, I do." Michael looked uneasy. "Olivia, is this necessary?" "Yes, Michael, it is. I think it's a fair challenge," I said firmly. Margaret smiled, almost smugly. "All right, dear. Challenge accepted." So, the battle of budgets began. I kept meticulous records of every penny I spent, making sure to be as efficient as possible. Meanwhile, I noticed Michael sneaking extra cash from the joint account, but I didn't say anything. The month flew by, and soon it was time to compare our expenses. We sat down at the dining table, each with our records. "Let's see what you've got, Olivia," Margaret said, a confident smile on her face. I laid out my documents, showing every transaction and bill. "As you can see, I've managed to save quite a bit this month, even with all the regular expenses." Margaret looked over the papers, her smile fading slightly. "Not bad, but let's see what Michael has." Michael cleared his throat. "Well, I didn't spend much, just the usual stuff." I decided it was time to reveal what I knew. "Michael, what about the extra money you took from our joint account?" Michael's face turned red. I needed it for some personal things." I pulled out the bank statements from the joint account. "Here's the proof. Your spending was higher than mine this month." Margaret's face was a mix of surprise and anger. "Michael, you lied? Why?" Michael didn't have an answer. He just looked down, embarrassed. I turned to Margaret. "As you can see, I'm quite capable of managing our finances efficiently." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she looked up, her expression hard. "Fine, you've made your point. But this doesn't change anything. I still believe I know what's best for this family." I let out a sigh. It was a small victory, but I knew the battle was far from over. Margaret's control over our lives was still a problem, and Michael's lack of support was even more concerning. But at least I had proven my point. I was good with numbers, and I knew how to manage money. It was a start, but I knew there were more challenges ahead. The air was tense after the budget challenge. Margaret's attitude towards me hadn't improved, and Michael was still avoiding any confrontation. I knew something had to give, and soon it did, but not in the way I expected. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when Margaret walked in, her expression stern. "Olivia, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. I turned to face her. "Okay, Margaret, what's on your mind?" "It's about your attitude towards money. You're too controlling, too greedy. It's not healthy," she accused. I was taken aback. "Greedy? Margaret, I'm just trying to be responsible with our finances." Margaret shook her head. "No, you're hoarding. You don't want to share. You don't understand what it means to be part of a family." I felt my frustration rising. "That's not true. I work hard for my money, and I think it's fair to want to manage it wisely." Before I could say more, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" "Your wife," Margaret said, turning to him. "She's too obsessed with money. It's not right." Michael looked at me, then at his mother. "Olivia, maybe you should ease up a bit. Mom has a point." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Michael, you're taking her side? After all the evidence I showed you? Michael shrugged. I just think we should all get along. That was the last straw. I stormed out of the kitchen and went to our home office. I pulled out the documents I had been keeping, proof of all the money Michael had been giving to Margaret without my knowledge. I gathered everything and went back to the kitchen. Okay, you want to talk about money? Let's talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. I laid out the documents on the table. Bank statements, receipts, everything. Here's proof of all the money Michael has been giving you, Margaret, most of it from my earnings. Margaret's face turned red. That's none of your business. He's my son, and he's helping his mother. I looked at Michael. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Michael looked away. I just wanted to help her. I turned back to Margaret. And what about the wedding? You wanted a grand affair. Who do you think paid for that? It was me, against my wishes. Margaret was silent, her mouth a tight line. I took a deep breath. I've had enough. This is not how a family should be. I work hard for my money, and I won't be accused of being greedy or controlling for wanting to manage it responsibly. Margaret looked at me, her eyes cold. So what are you going to do? I met her gaze. I'm going to think about what's best for me. This can't go on. With that, I left the room. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and sadness. My marriage was crumbling, and the family I had hoped to be part of was nothing like I had imagined. It was time to make some tough decisions. But for the moment, I just needed some space to think and to breathe. The house felt colder. The walls seemed to echo my thoughts. I spent the next few days mostly in silence, contemplating my next steps. I knew a conversation with Michael was inevitable, and it came sooner than I expected. It was a quiet evening. Michael walked into the living room where I was sitting, a determined look on his face. We need to talk, Olivia, he said. I nodded. Yes, we do. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking, and I've made a decision. I waited, my heart pounding. I want things to go back to how they were. I want to spend my money how I like. I don't want to argue about it anymore, he said. I looked at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. Michael, it's not just about the money. It's about respect, trust, and partnership. We're supposed to be in this together. He shook his head. I can't live like this, constantly being questioned and judged. So, I'm giving you an ultimatum. Let me spend without restraint, or we get a divorce. His words hit me like a punch. I felt a mix of disbelief and clarity. You're giving me an ultimatum? Yes, he said firmly. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Okay, Michael. If that's how you see our marriage, then I agree to the divorce. He seemed taken aback. You agree? Just like that? I stood up, feeling a sense of resolve. Yes, just like that. I won't be part of a marriage where my partner doesn't respect me or our future together. I deserve better. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Olivia, are you sure? I nodded. Yes, I'm sure. I want a partner who stands with me, not against me. And clearly, that's not you. Michael didn't say anything more. He just turned and left the room. I sat back down, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The ultimatum was meant to corner me, but instead, it had set me free. The house felt different after Michael left, quiet, empty, but it was a space I was ready to reclaim. I began by reorganizing, rearranging furniture, and redecorating. It was therapeutic, a way of wiping the slate clean. One evening, while sorting through old photographs, my phone rang. It was Sarah, a dear friend I hadn't seen in months. Olivia, how are you holding up? Sarah's voice was warm, laced with concern. I'm managing, Sarah. Just taking it one day at a time, I replied. I can't believe Michael did that. And his mom? I never trusted her, Sarah added. I let out a soft laugh. You and me both. But it's over now. I'm focusing on what's ahead. You're so strong, Olivia. Hey, why don't we catch up soon? It's been too long, Sarah suggested. That sounds perfect. Let's do it. I agreed, feeling a flicker of excitement. We met the next evening at a cozy cafe, a place brimming with memories. Sarah's presence was comforting, a reminder of life beyond my recent troubles. "Olivia, I'm so proud of you. You're handling this like a champ," Sarah said as we sipped our coffee. I shrugged modestly. "I don't have a choice, Sarah. I refuse to let this break me." "You're amazing. Remember, I'm always here if you need anything," she said, squeezing my hand across the table. I smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Sarah. That means the world to me." Life gradually regained its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, found solace in quiet evenings with books, and poured myself into my work. I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. Then one day, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Olivia, I want to apologize. Can we talk?" His voice was unsteady. I hesitated, but answered, "Go ahead, Michael." I was wrong, terribly wrong. Living with my mom, it's impossible. She's never satisfied, and I can't keep up with her demands. I don't have enough money. "I need to come back home, Olivia," he pleaded. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "Michael, I accepted your apology, but it changes nothing. We had our time, and it's over now. I've moved on." "Olivia, please, I cut him off. "No, Michael, this is my life, and I'm not going back to how things were. Take care of yourself." Hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had picked up the pieces of my shattered life, and I wasn't about to scatter them again. I was whole, on my own, and that was all I needed. Months had passed since the divorce finalized, and each day felt like a step forward. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was mine, and I cherished every bit of it. My life had taken a turn, but I was in control now, steering it in a direction that felt right. One afternoon, as I sat in my office crunching numbers, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. "Hey, Liv, how about dinner tonight? Just the two of us." I smiled and quickly typed a response. "Sounds great, Dad. See you tonight." Dinner with my dad was always special. He was the one who taught me to be strong, independent. We met at our favorite diner, a place that felt like home. As we settled into our booth, Dad looked at me with his kind eyes. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" "I'm good, Dad. Really, I am. It's been tough, but I'm finding my way," I answered honestly. He nodded. "You're strong, Olivia. Always have been. I'm proud of you." We talked about work, about life, about everything and nothing. It was comforting, familiar. Later that week, I was at the grocery store when I bumped into an old acquaintance, Emily. We had lost touch over the years, but seeing her felt like a pleasant surprise. "Olivia, it's been ages. How are you?" Emily greeted me with a warm smile. "Hey, Emily, I'm doing well, thanks. Life's been interesting," I replied with a chuckle. We chatted for a while, catching up on old times. Before parting ways, Emily said, "You seem different, Olivia. More at peace, I guess." I thought for a moment. "I guess I am. It took a while, but I'm finally in a good place." The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I had reclaimed my life, my space. I indulged in hobbies I had long forgotten, spent time with friends, and found joy in the little things. One evening, as I sat on my porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walked by. She was an elderly lady, always kind and observant. "Good evening, Olivia. You seem happy these days," she remarked, leaning on her walking stick. I smiled at her. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson. Yes, I am happy. It took some time, but I'm there." She nodded approvingly. "Good for you, dear. Happiness is something we all deserve." As she walked away, I sat there, soaking in the calm of the evening. The journey had been long, filled with ups and downs. But as I looked back, I realized that every step, every stumble had led me here. I had lost a husband and a troublesome mother-in-law, but in return, I gained something far more precious, myself. I was complete, just as I was. A calculator in my head and a heart resilient enough to start anew. You could say I traded in chaos for candy when I met Ben. My days used to be filled with managing disasters and cleaning up corporate messes, but then love swept in, and before I knew it, I was knee-deep in sugar and spice, and everything nice at Sugar Haven, Ben's family candy store. It wasn't long before I took over the store's finances, and we started to see some real success. "Good morning, love." Ben greeted me one Monday as I stepped into the sweet aroma of our shop. His smile was infectious, and despite the tension that was brewing, it was a reminder of why I was here. "Morning," I replied, flipping through the mail, bills mostly, which I had learned to manage like a pro. "Sales are up this month. That new chocolate line is a hit," I said, trying to keep things positive. Ben just shrugged, a bit too casually. "Yeah, well, that's all you, isn't it? Mom still thinks I'm the candy king," he chuckled, but I could tell the words weighed on him more than he let on. Speaking of the devil, Linda waltzed in, all smiles and no sense of personal space. "Benjamin, my boy, you've outdone yourself. The store looks fabulous," she beamed, patting her son on the back. Her gaze then slid over to me, and her lips pursed just slightly. "Anna, still playing shopkeeper, I see." I let out a soft sigh. "Good morning, Linda. And yes, playing shopkeeper is keeping us in the black," I responded, keeping my tone even. It was too early for a spat, and the last thing I wanted was to give her the satisfaction of seeing me ruffled. She tisked, waving a hand in dismissal. "Numbers, numbers. You should leave that to the accountants and help my son with the real business." Her eyes glinted with that all-too-familiar mix of disdain and condescension. Before I could answer, Ben stepped in. "Mom, Anna's doing more than fine. We're doing great because she's got a head for business." He slipped an arm around my waist, a silent show of solidarity. Linda sniffed, clearly not convinced. "Well, as long as my boy is happy, I suppose that's what matters." And with that, she flounced off to the other side of the store, presumably to find some other way to remind us of her presence. Ben squeezed my side apologetically. "Don't let her get to you," he murmured. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm not. Let's just focus on the shop, okay?" And focus we did. With each day, Sugar Haven became more than just a candy store. It was our little piece of paradise. At least that's what I thought until everything began to crumble. I started noticing the changes when the deliveries got more frequent, and they weren't full of sugar or spice, but things that had price tags that made my stomach drop. "Another package, Ben?" I asked one evening as I locked up the register. I held up a sleek gadget still in its shiny packaging. It looked expensive. "Oh, that's the new phone I ordered," Ben said with a grin as he cut open the box like a kid on Christmas. "Top of the line." I raised an eyebrow. "Don't we have other things to invest in? The mixer in the back has been making that funny noise." Ben dismissed me with a wave of his hand, his attention fixed on peeling the protective film off his new toy. "It's fine, Anna. We've got to treat ourselves too, you know?" A part of me wanted to argue, to remind him of the thin line we were walking financially, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't just the phone either. Linda had taken to showing off new outfits every other week, parading through Sugar Haven like it was her personal runway. "Anna, look at this dress, isn't it just darling?" Linda twirled in a floral number that had to cost more than we made in a day. "It's nice," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But aren't we supposed to be saving up to fix the sign out front?" Linda scoffed, patting her son's cheek. "Nonsense! The store is doing wonderfully. Benjamin, tell her." Ben, who had been half listening, nodded along. "Yeah, we're doing great, Anna. Don't worry so much." That was the problem, though. I did worry. I worried every time I looked at our books and saw the numbers that didn't add up. Doing great wasn't the term I would use when every profit we made was being swallowed by personal purchases. "Look, I'm just saying we should be careful." I tried again later that week as we sat down to look at our finances. "Maybe we can set a budget for personal expenses?" Ben looked at me like I'd suggested we sell the store and become circus performers. "A budget? Come on, Anna, we're not that bad, and it's not like you to be stingy." It stung, that word, stingy. I wasn't being stingy. I was being sensible. "It's not about being stingy, Ben. It's about being smart. We have to think about the future of Sugar Haven." He didn't seem to hear me, though, already scrolling through a website for another purchase. "You worry too much," he said, half distracted. It'll all work out. Things took a turn when Linda decided to bring in some extra help. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were inventory days, and I was elbow deep in organizing our latest shipment of candy jars when she walked in, arm in arm with a girl who couldn't have been older than 20. "Anna, this is Tessa," Linda announced with a flourish. "Tessa, dear, this is Anna, my son's assistant." I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. "Nice to meet you, Tessa, but I'm actually the co-manager here." Tessa offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've heard a lot about you. I'm really excited to be part of the team." I glanced at Linda, whose smug look was enough to tell me she hadn't consulted Ben about this new development. "What exactly will Tessa be assisting with?" I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Oh, she's going to be helping out with the business side of things. You can only do so much, after all," Linda said, with a dismissive glance at my inventory list. I nodded, still a bit confused. "All right, well, we have a system here, so I'll have to bring her up to speed." It didn't take long for me to see that Tessa's version of helping out was more about hovering and less about doing actual work. And when I saw the salary Ben's mother had set for her, I nearly choked. "Ben, can we talk?" I cornered him later that day in the office. "Sure, what's up?" he asked, not looking up from his computer. "It's about Tessa. Her salary it's more than what we can afford for the role she's in." Ben finally looked up, his brow furrowing. "Mom said it was fine. She thinks Tessa's going to bring a lot to the table." I sighed, feeling like I was talking to a wall. "But we agreed to discuss new hires together, especially when it comes to how much we're paying them." He shrugged, that annoyingly dismissive gesture becoming more frequent. "What's done is done. Mom has a good feeling about her." I had to bite back a retort. Good feelings didn't balance books. I left the office feeling like I was the only one seeing the red flags, while Ben and his mother were content to parade around with blindfolds. I've always been the kind to check twice, maybe 3 times, especially when it comes to numbers. So when I stumbled upon an envelope stuffed in the back of a filing cabinet while hunting for a misplaced invoice, my first thought was that it was just another forgotten bill. But as I flipped through the papers, my heart started to race, not from excitement, but from cold, hard dread. It was a loan document, with Sugar Haven listed as collateral, and the amount was far more than what would ever be considered reasonable for our modest shop. "Ben," I said, walking into his cluttered office, papers in hand. "What is this?" He glanced up, and I saw his eyes flicker, the first sign of guilt I'd seen in him in months. "Oh, it's nothing. Just a small loan I took out to cover, store improvements." "Store improvements?" I echoed, incredulous. "This amount could renovate the store 5 times over. What did you really use it for?" There was a pause, long enough for the truth to wedge itself between us. "Okay, look," he started, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "I might have used some of it for the house, the one I've been working on, for us." "For us?" I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Or for your gadgets and whatever else you've been blowing money on." He stood up then, his chair scraping back with a sound that felt like a gavel on my patience. "It's not like that, Anna. You don't understand. This is all going to pay off in the end." I shook my head. "No, Ben. Taking out a loan against the store without telling me, that's what I don't understand. How could you be so reckless?" Before he could answer, Linda bustled in, her nose wrinkling as she saw the papers in my hand. "What's all this about?" she demanded. Ben tried to explain, but I cut him off, thrusting the loan papers at her. "Did you know about this?" She barely glanced at the documents before waving them off. "Of course I did. Ben's just doing what's necessary for our future. And who are you to question him? You're just the help, after all." The words stung, but more than that, they fueled a fire in me. "Just the help?" I said, my voice low but firm. "I've been keeping this store afloat while you two have been treating it like your personal bank account." Ben's face had gone pale, and Linda looked like she was about to spit fire. "You ungrateful little—" "No," I interrupted, my calm surprising even myself. "What's ungrateful is not recognizing the hard work someone's been putting into this business. What's foolish is risking everything for a house that we don't even need." I waited for them to say something, to defend themselves, but all they did was stare at me, caught in the act. I left the room then, the documents clutched in my hand like a verdict yet to be delivered. The kitchen table was never really meant for business meetings, but that day, it was surrounded by the most solemn faces, as if we were about to discuss matters of state instead of the confectionery. Ben cleared his throat, his eyes not quite meeting mine. We need to talk about the store's future. I sat down, folding my hands on the table. We already did that when I found the loan documents. Linda huffed from across the table, her arms crossed. We need to be realistic, Anna. The store isn't pulling in enough to cover the debts. We have to find money somewhere. There it was, the we that really meant me. I kept my voice steady. What do you suggest? Her eyes gleamed with a kind of cold calculation. You have that inheritance from your parents. It could cover the debts and get the store back on its feet. I felt like I was listening to a stranger, not the woman whose son I had married. You want me to use my parents' money? The money they left for me, for my future? Ben finally spoke up. It's not like you're doing anything else with it. That money was meant for me, for my security, I said, the disbelief clear in my voice. And what about our security? Linda shot back. You're part of this family now, aren't you? I looked between them, my heart sinking. I am, but it seems you only remember that when you need something from me. Ben shifted uncomfortably. It's not like that, but we're drowning here, Anna. So, you expect me to just hand over my future? Just like that? I asked. Linda leaned forward. If you care about this family, yes. I thought of the long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices I had made for the store. If I do this, if I invest my inheritance, I want a third of the store. I want to be an official co-owner. The room fell silent. Then Linda laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the walls. You? A co-owner? Don't be ridiculous. You're not business material. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Then you find another way to cover your debts, because my inheritance is not your emergency fund. Ben's face was unreadable, but Linda's was red with anger. You'd let this family business go under? I've tried to save it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm. I wasn't one for late-night visits to the shop, but something in my gut told me to go to Sugar Haven that evening. The place was dark, which was expected, but the faint glow of a light from the back office wasn't. I pushed the door open, the familiar tinkle of the bell sounding almost ominous in the silence. The sweet scent of confectionery that usually comforted me now felt heavy, loaded with the scent of betrayal as I walked towards the back. The murmurs from the office grew clearer as I approached, and then I saw them through the partly open door. Ben, with his arms around the new assistant, Tessa, who giggled at something he whispered in her ear. I pushed the door open fully, and they sprang apart, their expressions turning from shock to guilt within seconds. Anna, Ben stammered, straightening his shirt. What are you? It's not what it looks like. I crossed my arms, feeling a cold calm settle over me. Really? Because it looks like I just caught my husband with his arms around another woman. Tessa was smoothing her hair back, looking anywhere but at me. We were just going over inventory. At midnight? With the inventory in your arms? I said, my tone dry. Ben's eyes were pleading now. Anna, please, you're blowing this out of proportion. I laughed, short and humorless. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear to me. He took a step towards me, and I held up a hand. Save it, Ben. I don't know what's worse, the cheating or the pathetic lies. Tessa finally spoke up, her voice small. I'm sorry, Anna. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I looked at her, really looked at her, young, naive, and caught in the web of a man who couldn't take responsibility for his actions. You should be, and you should also be looking for another job. Ben's protest was immediate. You can't fire her for this. I turned to him, my resolve steeling. I can and I will, and I'll be looking for a good lawyer in the morning. His face paled. Anna, please, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said, cutting him off. You've made your choices. Now you get to live with them. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of there with my head held high, the sound of Ben calling after me fading into the background. The morning after I caught Ben was bright, a stark contrast to the mood in our home. I'd spent the night at my own place, the one I kept as a rental property. As I sat at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a message from Ben. I considered not even reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a photo of a bank letter addressed to Ben, the words, "Final notice," and "immediate repayment required" standing out. Beneath it, he'd typed a message. "We need to talk. This is serious." I typed back a simple, "On my way," and got ready to face the music. When I arrived at the confectionery, Ben and Linda were already there, pacing like caged animals. Linda spotted me first, and her expression soured. "Decided to show up, did you?" she snapped as I walked in. I nodded, holding her gaze. "You wanted to talk?" Ben held out the letter to me. "The bank's coming down hard. We could lose everything." I scanned the letter, the numbers not surprising me, but still making my stomach turn. "So, what's your plan?" Linda's plan was apparently to glare daggers at me. "We wouldn't be in this mess if you just helped us when we asked." Ignoring her, I addressed Ben. "What are you going to do?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking defeated. I thought you could pay it off, with your inheritance." My laugh was bitter. "And I told you, I'm not doing that without a stake in the business." Linda stepped forward. "You're being unreasonable, Anna. This is a family business." I met her challenge with a calm I didn't feel. "And where was this family when your son was spending money we don't have and hiring his friends for fun?" Ben started to say something, but stopped, his eyes dropping to the floor. "You don't get to play the family card only when it suits you," I continued. "We'll figure something else out then," Ben muttered. "You'll have to," I agreed. Then Linda did something unexpected. She smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. "Fine, but if you're not going to help, then you're out. We'll manage without you. You're fired." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch out before I matched her smile with my own. "Okay." Their surprise was almost comical. "Just like that?" Ben asked, his voice incredulous. "Just like that," I confirmed. "But I want you to know, I took photos of you and Tessa. I have records of all the money you've wasted. If you think you can fire me and sweep all this under the rug, you're wrong." Linda's smile vanished. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, but I would. And when I leave, I'm taking all my hard work with me. You can explain to the bank why the business is about to tank without the person who was actually running it." Months had passed since I last set foot in Sugar Haven, and life had taken on a new kind of normal. The crisp sound of papers, the hum of focused conversations, and the sight of a crisis managed and resolved. These had replaced the scent of sugar and spice. I sat in my new office, a stark contrast to the confectionery's back room, when my phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Claire, a former employee at the shop and the only one I still talked to. "Hey Claire, what's up?" I greeted, with a hint of caution. News about Sugar Haven always carried a tinge of the past. "You haven't heard then?" Claire's voice was a mix of pity and discomfort. "The shop. They closed down last week. The bank foreclosed on them, and the house too." I leaned back in my chair, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I hadn't realized was there. "I see. And Ben and his mother?" There was a pause. "They're not doing great. Rumor has it they've moved in with his aunt. No one's seen them much." I sighed, not quite sure how to feel. "Thanks for letting me know, Claire." She hesitated before adding, "Anna, everyone knows you were the heart of that place. It was never the same after you left." A small, sad smile touched my lips. "I appreciate you saying that. How about you? Found a new job yet?" "Yeah, I'm working at a bakery downtown. It's not Sugar Haven, but it's a start." "That's great to hear. You always had a talent for baking. I'm sure you'll do well there." We chatted for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. I hung up and looked out the window at the bustling street below. There was a knock at my door, and my assistant peeked in. "Your 3 o'clock is here, Anna." "Thanks, send them in," I responded, shaking off the remnants of nostalgia. The clients came in, a husband and wife team looking worried about their own business. I stood to greet them, ready to dive into another challenge. "We've heard great things about you, Anna," the wife said as we sat down. "They say you're the best crisis manager in town." I smiled, the title sitting comfortably with me. "I'll do my best to live up to that reputation. Now, tell me about your business, and let's see how we can turn things around." As they spoke, I listened, already forming strategies in my mind. This was my world now, where every problem had a solution and every crisis was an opportunity. Sugar Haven and its bitter memories were behind me, and ahead was a path that I had forged for myself, a path of resilience, redemption, and rebirth. The meeting stretched on, the client's initial anxiety giving way to hopeful smiles as we discussed possibilities. They left with a renewed sense of purpose, and I turned back to my desk, my heart lighter than it had been in a long time. In the end, I realized that sometimes the sweetest outcomes come after the most bitter trials, and the future was mine to create, one careful step at a time. I'm Jane. I had just turned 28 when I thought I met the love of my life, Mike, and everything happened so fast. We were married within a year of meeting. Mike is an accountant, tall, with a laugh that could light up any room. I work in digital marketing, love to paint on weekends, and I have always been more of a planner. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. It was the day after our wedding, and our living room was piled high with wrapped presents and envelopes. There was a chaotic beauty to it all, the remnants of our celebration. That's when Mike's parents, Carol and Dave, dropped by. I hadn't really gotten to know them since we got married so quickly, but they seemed all right, normal even. As we started opening gifts, I noticed Carol and Dave were more than just a little interested in the contents. "Is that a crystal vase?" Carol asked, picking up a shimmering piece that my aunt had given us. She turned it over in her hands, eyes gleaming. "Yeah, it's from my Aunt Linda. Pretty, isn't it?" I said, trying to nudge her attention away from claiming it. Before I knew it, Carol had placed it in a separate pile to the side. "I think we can find a good place for this at our house," she said nonchalantly. Mike didn't seem to notice, busy untangling a set of fancy kitchen gadgets from his cousin. I shot him a look, hoping he'd say something. "Mom, that's our wedding gift," Mike finally said with an easy smile, as if it was all a big joke. "Oh, come on. It'll just collect dust here. We'll use it," Dave chimed in, wrapping an arm around Carol. "Besides, you two are young. You'll get plenty more gifts over the years." I tried to laugh it off with them, but it felt off. "Actually, I was thinking it would look great in our foyer," I said, attempting to claim it back without causing a scene. Carol looked at me, her expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Jane, you need to learn to share. We're family now, and families help each other out," she said, her tone firm, as if she was teaching me some sort of lesson. Mike, catching the tension, quickly jumped in. "Let's not worry about this now. We've got plenty of gifts, right, Jane?" I nodded, biting back my words. But as they continued to sift through the gifts, setting aside a few choice items for themselves, that uncomfortable feeling settled deep in my stomach. It was like watching strangers claim parts of my life as their own. And Mike, well, he just let them. Our first year of marriage flew by, and before I knew it, our anniversary had arrived. I wanted to make it special, a celebration of us. So I booked a table at Chez Louis, a cozy little spot we both loved. I thought it would be romantic to have Mike's parents join us, to show them they're important to us. As we sat down at the restaurant, Carol and Dave were already there, menus in hand. "This place is fancy," Carol said, eyeing the chandeliers. Mike squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you for organizing it all. The waiter came by and we started to order. I went for the salmon, Mike's favorite, and I noticed Carol's eyes darting down the menu to the most expensive items. "We'll have the lobster and the filet mignon," she declared, pointing at the priciest things without a second glance. Dave nodded in agreement. "And why not throw in a bottle of your best wine?" he added, winking at the waiter. I could feel my smile stiffening. "Quite the celebration, huh?" I tried to keep my voice light. Mike shrugged. "It's a special night," he said. Let's not think about the cost tonight. The conversation was light for the most part, but I couldn't help but notice how Carol and Dave savored the food like it was their last meal, almost oblivious to the price tag I knew would come at the end. As we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling of being taken advantage of. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the principle. It was our anniversary, and it felt like it was being hijacked. When the check arrived, I saw Mike's eyes widen a little, but he quickly recovered and handed his card to the waiter. On our way out, Carol looped her arm through mine. You know, Jane, this was just lovely. We should do it again next year, she said, a satisfied smile on her face. Thanksgiving was around the corner, and with it came the start of the holiday season. Mike and I had started to decorate the house, a mix of fall colors and early Christmas cheer. It was cozy, the kind of place you'd want to come back to after a long day. One evening, as we were stringing up some lights around the living room windows, Mike's phone pinged with a message. He read it and laughed. "Oh, my parents are ahead of the game. They've already sent their Christmas wish list." I was untangling another set of lights and looked up. Wish list? Yeah, they send one every year. Helps with shopping, he explained, his fingers scrolling through his phone. Curiosity got the better of me. So, what's on this famous list? Mike hesitated, then handed me his phone. The list was extensive. Top-tier electronics, designer clothes, luxury items that they probably didn't even need. I scrolled through in disbelief. They can't be serious, I said. This is a lot. Mike took his phone back and shrugged. They like the good stuff. What can I say? I didn't know how to respond. There was a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. Mike's birthday was also coming up, and I'd been so excited to give him the watch he'd been eyeing for months. Now it felt like any gift would be less about us and more about fulfilling a list. When it came to us making our list, I couldn't help but feel petty making one at all. Maybe we should just ask for charitable donations in our name, I suggested half-heartedly. Mike laughed. Good one, but seriously, what do you want? You need a new laptop, right? The holidays rolled around, and I got Carol and Dave a nice coffee maker. Nothing too fancy but practical. They, in turn, gave me a set of scented candles. They were nice, but the difference was stark. I didn't say anything. Mike seemed happy with the fancy drone they got him, though. The unspoken rule was clear. We were expected to give big and receive small. It didn't feel right, but bringing it up only seemed to cause tension. So, I kept quiet, wrapping gifts and pasting on a smile for the holidays. But inside, I was beginning to count the costs, not just in dollars, but in the emotional toll this was starting to take. I was at my desk, staring at the computer screen when the email notification popped up. It was my quarterly bonus, bigger than I had expected. My first thought was to do something meaningful with it, something for Mike and me. So, I booked us a trip to Paris. We had talked about going since we met, and it felt like the perfect time to make that dream happen. That night over dinner, I told Mike about the surprise. His face lit up like I'd never seen before. Paris? Really? Babe, that's amazing! He exclaimed, getting up to kiss me. I was basking in the joy of the moment when his phone rang. It was his mom. I could tell by the way his face changed. Yeah, she booked us a trip to Paris, he said into the phone, and I knew I should have asked him not to say anything just yet. Mike's enthusiasm dwindled as he listened more and more. I know you've always wanted to go. He trailed off, looking at me with a pained expression. I felt my heart sink. He hung up and there was a heavy silence. They want to come with us, he said finally, almost like he was asking for permission. I sat there, my fork halfway to my mouth, paused in midair. To Paris? With us? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah. They said they've never been and always wanted to go, Mike explained, running a hand through his hair. I think we should take them. The room felt suddenly too small. It's supposed to be for us, Mike. Our trip, I said, feeling a tightness in my chest. He didn't respond at first, then. I know, but they're getting older, and I feel bad. They've done so much for me. I thought about all the one-sided gift exchanges, the anniversary dinner, and every other little thing that had piled up over the past year. But this is our time, I insisted, my voice firm. We can plan a trip with them another time. This bonus, it's for us. Mike sighed, a deep, frustrated sound. They won't understand that. You know how they are. And you know how hard I've worked for this, I said, the words like stones in my mouth. I want us to enjoy it together, just us, like we planned. Mike didn't say anything for a while. Then, okay, we'll tell them some other time might work better. But when the time came to tell them, Mike's words faltered. Look, maybe we can all go together next year, he offered, but Carol was having none of it. Why next year? We can afford it now, she retorted over the speakerphone, her voice laced with disappointment. I couldn't take it anymore. Because this trip is for us, Carol, Mike and I. We need this time together, I said, unable to hide my frustration. There was a pause. Then Carol said, Well, that's very selfish of you, Jane. Very selfish indeed. After the call, the air between Mike and me was tense. He was torn, I could tell, but this was one thing I wasn't willing to budge on. Paris was meant to be a dream trip for us, and I wasn't going to let that dream be taken away. Mike became a shadow in his own home, leaving early for work and coming back late. Our conversations dwindled to monosyllables. Dinner's in the oven, I'd say when I heard the garage door open, my voice echoing off the empty walls. Thanks, he'd reply, a hollow word that hung in the air between us. I missed him, missed us. I yearned for the easy days when we'd dream together on the couch, our plans and laughter intertwined. I longed to reach out to him, to break through the invisible barrier that had erected itself after the argument over Paris. But every attempt felt like speaking through a thick glass wall. I could see him, but I couldn't reach him. One particularly hard evening, I sat at the dinner table across from Mike, the sound of his fork against the plate drilling into the silence. I cleared my throat. Mike, this can't go on, I started, my voice barely above a whisper, fearful of shattering the fragile peace. We need to talk about what happened. We can't let this silence be the new normal for us. Mike continued to eat, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his fork, a sign that I had his attention, even if just for a moment. What do you want me to say, Jane? He asked, a hint of weariness seeping through. I want to understand why you're taking this so hard, why it feels like you're choosing them over me, I replied, the hurt evident in my tone. He sighed, his hands folded in front of him. They're my parents, Jane. They've been hoping to go to Paris their whole lives. And what about what we've been hoping for? Our plans? Our dreams? My own frustration started to bubble up, words becoming more pointed, desperate to bridge the gap between us. Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation I'd come to recognize. I know, he said, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of the man I married, conflicted and torn, but not indifferent. It's just, they've always been there for me. I feel obligated, you know? But where does that leave us, Mike? I pressed, leaning forward, trying to catch his eye. What about our marriage? He didn't respond right away, and in that pause, I felt a wave of fear. Fear that maybe we weren't as solid as I had believed, that maybe the foundation we had built was less rock and more sand, easily eroded by the steady tide of his parents' needs and wants. It's supposed to be us against the world, Mike, not me against you and them, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the conflict warring within him. I know, Jane. I just don't know how to make everyone happy. That's just it, I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. We can't always make everyone happy. But we made vows to each other, Mike. Doesn't that count for something? He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the table before finding mine. It does. It counts for a lot. The rest of the meal passed in a contemplative silence, a change from the strained quiet that had become our norm. It was as if my words had planted a seed, or perhaps watered one that had been lying dormant within Mike all this time. The morning sun poured in through the windows, but the warmth it usually brought seemed to have no place in our home today. I woke up to an eerie quiet, the other side of the bed untouched from the night before. The emptiness of the house felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its silence. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I reached for my phone, expecting the usual absence of messages, given the silent treatment that had taken residence in our home. Instead, my screen was flooded with notifications, all from my bank. A lump formed in my throat as I read the details. Multiple transactions, including airline tickets and a pair of hotel bookings in Paris, all made while I was asleep. The timestamps on the emails told me the flight would have left hours ago. Mike and his parents were already on their way to Paris, using my hard-earned bonus to fund a trip I was meant to be on. Disbelief turned to anger, and then to a crushing sense of betrayal. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, as the reality settled in. Mike had access to my account. I'd trusted him implicitly, never imagining he would abuse that trust. Yet, here it was in stark black and white, a digital paper trail of deceit. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The one person I had believed would stand by me had chosen his own comfort over our relationship. I thought back to all the times I'd brushed aside the little signs, the excuses I'd made for him, for us. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number, knowing full well he wouldn't answer. Not with the time difference, not with my previous ultimatum ringing in his ears. "Mike," I began, the beep of the voicemail almost mocking in its cheerfulness. "I saw the charges. You took your parents to Paris with my bonus. I don't even know what to say, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything." The house felt even emptier after the call, the walls closing in on me with the weight of everything unsaid, and now, perhaps, never to be spoken. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. They had left, just like that, with no regard for me or the life we were supposed to be building together. I canceled the hotel rooms, the return flights, every piece of the trip that was connected to my finances. With each cancellation, I felt a piece of my old life fall away, the future I'd envisioned evaporating before my eyes. By the time I was done, there was nothing left to do but act. I contacted the bank and removed Mike's access to my accounts, a finality in each click that felt both terrifying and liberating. The man I had married, the family I had tried to be a part of, they were all just strangers now. Strangers who had used me, who had seen my generosity as something to exploit rather than cherish. I packed my bags with a robotic efficiency, each item a reminder of a dream I had to put away. There was no going back from this, no gentle words or apologies that could mend the rift that his betrayal had caused. Mike had chosen his path, and in doing so, he had set me on mine. The ring I'd once worn with pride lay cold and heavy in my palm. I set it down on the counter, its sparkle mocking in the morning light, and with one last look at the life I was leaving behind, I closed the door on the house that was never truly a home. It was late afternoon when I finally left the house. My car was packed with clothes and essentials, a stark reminder of the sudden turn my life had taken. As I drove, the messages began to flood in. One from Mike, several from his mother. I pulled over to read them, knowing they'd only fuel the fire of my resolve. Mike's message read, "Jane, please, we need to talk about this. Can't we just discuss it?" His words seemed hollow, almost insulting in their simplicity. I started to type a response, then stopped. No words would bridge the chasm between us. His mother's messages were a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on? Why have you canceled our rooms? Call me." I imagined her sitting in a cafe in Paris, expecting luxury and finding complication. I turned the phone off. They were in the middle of a trip funded by deceit. They could figure it out. My first stop was the bank. I needed to ensure my finances were completely secure. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman with a gentle face, greeted me. "I need to make sure all my accounts are locked down. My husband, he won't have access anymore," I explained, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. "Of course," she nodded, offering a sympathetic smile. "Let's make sure you're protected." By the time I left the bank, my accounts were secure, and a new sense of determination settled within me. I drove to my sister's house, the only place I felt I could go. She opened the door before I could even knock. "Jane, I've been so worried," she said, pulling me into a hug. I allowed myself a moment to just be held, to let the reality of my situation be shared. "I can't believe he would do this to you," she said as we sat down at her kitchen table. "You deserve so much better." I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "I do. And that's why I'm not going back. I've canceled everything. I've left the house. I'm done, Sarah." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Good for you. What's your plan now?" I looked around the familiar room, feeling the first twinge of relief. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm starting with a divorce. I can't stay married to someone who has so little respect for me." Sarah's face was a mixture of anger and pride. "I'll support you however I can. Do you need a lawyer?" "I'll find one," I said, my voice growing firmer with each word. "I need someone who doesn't know Mike or his family. I need this cut clean." The conversation shifted as Sarah helped me unpack my car and make plans for the next few days. There was a strange comfort in the mundane tasks, a grounding in the midst of chaos. I was standing in the kitchen at my sister's house, a mug of coffee warming my hands when my phone vibrated with a persistence that felt all too familiar. It was Mike, again. "Jane, we need to talk. I'm sorry, I miss you, and I think we can work things out." His text read, a mixture of apology and plea. I sighed, the same rehearsed, "I'm sorry," becoming a threadbare blanket that no longer provided comfort or warmth. "Not this time, Mike," I muttered under my breath, typing a response that left no room for ambiguity. "There's nothing left to discuss. Please respect my decision." I could almost hear the desperation in the silence that followed, but it wasn't enough to make me reconsider. Not anymore. My resolve was tested further when, a few days later, Mike's parents made a dramatic appearance at my sister's doorstep. Their faces were twisted in anger as they barged past Sarah, who stood wide-eyed at the door. "You've got some nerve, Jane," his mother exclaimed, her voice shrill. "You ruined our family vacation. You're just a greedy, selfish woman." Sarah stepped between us, her stance protective. "That's enough! You're not going to come into my house and insult my sister." The argument escalated until the neighbors peeked out of their windows, and I was sure someone would call the police. It ended with Sarah threatening to do just that if they didn't leave. Their departure left a sour air that lingered long after they were gone. But amidst the chaos, a realization settled within me. I was truly done. The divorce process was a cold, legal ballet, and I danced my part, signing papers and nodding through explanations of settlements and divisions. But with each stroke of the pen, I felt a chain breaking, a tether loosening. And then it was over. I stood outside the courthouse, a free woman. The air was crisp, a gentle wind playing with the loose strands of my hair. Sarah hugged me tight, her support unwavering. "You did it, Jane," she whispered, pride evident in her voice. I had done it. I had stood up to the selfishness that tried to claim me, stood firm against the manipulation that sought to keep me bound. I turned away from the courthouse, away from a past that no longer held me. The messages from Mike continued for a while, a mix of apologies, bargaining, and eventually anger. But they went unread, floating in the digital void as I moved forward with my life. The apartment I rented was small, but bathed in sunlight. I filled it with plants, books, and new memories. I went back to school, enrolling in classes that fueled a passion for learning that I'd neglected. And one quiet evening, as I sat on my little balcony, a cup of tea in hand, I deleted Mike's number from my phone. I was free. Free to heal, free to grow, and most importantly, free to be unapologetically me. I'm Liz, and by some twist of fate, I'm married to the most amazing guy I've ever met, Alex. We're both 28, got our own place, pay our bills, and live a life that's ours. It's been a year since we said I do, and honestly, life's been good, except for one little thing: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I never expected to be the daughter-in-law in shining armor, but I also didn't expect to be the family's unwanted guest. The day I met my in-laws, it felt like walking into a lion's den with a stake tied to my neck. My mother-in-law, Jane, had this way of looking at me, like she was trying to figure out if I was more of a nuisance or just plain boring. I could tell she had sized me up and found me lacking before I even had a chance to say hello. Alex had warned me about his mom. "She can be a bit much," he said as we drove to their place that first time. "But don't take it to heart, okay?" I didn't. Or at least I tried not to. At dinner, I was passing the salt when Jane said, "You know, Stephanie used to cook such wonderful meals. Remember that risotto, honey?" She said to Alex, who just nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I remember," he replied, not looking at me. I sat there, salt shaker in hand, feeling like I was invisible. They all talked about Stephanie as if I wasn't there. I felt a pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down with a smile. "Sounds like she was a great cook," I said, trying to seem unaffected. Jane's eyes met mine, and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, she was. She was a lot of things." That night, I told Alex how I felt. "It's like she's measuring me against some ghost." Alex hugged me close. "You're the one I chose, Liz. That's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, but as I'd learn, Jane had a long game in mind, and I was the pawn she was eager to sacrifice. I just didn't know it yet. Living with an allergy isn't just inconvenient. It's like having a shadow that's constantly whispering danger in your ear. Since I was a kid, peanuts have been my arch nemesis. It started with a spoonful of peanut paste and a trip to the emergency room that left my parents with a crystal clear message. Keep her away from peanuts and a whole host of other foods if you want her to grow up. It's not just peanuts, though. Soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes, they're all off limits. It's a list that makes waiters raise an eyebrow and friends hesitate to invite me over for dinner. It's also a list that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows by heart, yet she somehow manages to question every single time we're over for dinner. "Are you sure you can't even have a little bit of this pie? It's got almond extract," she'd ask, with a tone that hovered between concern and disbelief. I would smile politely, though I'd rather not, and say, "Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks, though." It was the same dance every time. I remember once, at a family gathering, I was navigating the buffet, a mental checklist running through my head. Alex was by my side, plate in hand, trying to help me find something safe to eat. That's when Jane swooped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Liz, you must try this casserole. I made sure it was Liz-friendly," she announced, but the glint in her eye didn't match her nurturing words. Alex paused, his fork mid-air. "Mom, you used cream of mushroom soup in this, right?" he asked, knowing full well that many brands included soy, a big no-no for me. Jane's smile faltered for a second. "Oh, I think so. It should be fine." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. We made our excuses, me leaving the casserole untouched. But the incident stuck with me. It was a small victory in what felt like an ongoing battle, a battle where Jane held all the cards because she controlled the kitchen. I've learned to navigate this world with careful steps. Eating out is a strategic operation. Alex and I were at our favorite Italian place, a rare find that understood the gravity of food allergies. I'd recited my usual spiel to the waiter, who nodded understandingly. Alex watched me with those soft eyes of his, the ones that said he'd do anything to make my life easier. "You okay?" he asked after the waiter left. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just hate making a fuss," I replied, folding my napkin on my lap. "You're not making a fuss. You're making sure you don't, die," he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, a short, grateful sound. "Well, when you put it that way." After dinner, as we walked under the clear night sky, I felt light, happy. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Her words were like a cloud over the moon, darkening the moment. "Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your condition seriously. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I read the text to Alex, who wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "She's just trying to get to you," he said. But as much as I wanted to shrug it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's message was more than just a jab. It was a warning, a reminder that my allergy made me vulnerable, not just to food, but to people like her, who saw it as a weakness to be exploited. The rest of the walk home, I couldn't help but think about all the close calls, all the accidental exposures, and how easily something could go wrong. It wasn't just the peanuts or the soy or the peas. It was the realization that my allergy was more than a personal battle. It was a chink in my armor that someone like Jane could see as an opportunity. And that thought was scarier than any allergic reaction I'd ever had. Dinners at Jane's house were always a production, like a play where everyone knew their parts except me. I was the wild card, the one who could unintentionally cause a scene with a single bite. Alex tried to make it better, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing in someone else's home court. One particular evening, the tension was as thick as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there, my own plate empty, waiting to figure out what I could eat without a trip to the hospital. "Alex, darling, pass the green beans to Liz. They're just divine," Jane said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I eyed the beans, but something seemed off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," she said, waving a hand dismissively. I put my hand up, stopping Alex's reach. "I can't eat those, remember? Almonds are a no-go for me." Jane feigned surprise, a hand to her chest. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex's chair scraped back as he stood up. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." His voice was firm, edged with a frustration that made Jane's eyes narrow just a little. "I just wanted to make something nice," she said. "It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other relatives glanced around, forks paused midair, not sure where to look. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, embarrassed by the spotlight. Alex's dad, Mark, tried to break the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were taking notes for next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came." I shook my head, tired of feeling like a problem to be managed. "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, like he was seeing me, but also seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. This particular evening, it was like a cloud had settled over him, and I knew it before he even said a word. "Mom thinks we should consider..." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. I felt a tightness in my chest. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled. "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know. It's just... She has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick. I watched him, this man I loved, wrestling with the seeds of doubt his mother had planted. "Alex, do you doubt us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No." He looked up, finally, his eyes clear and firm. "No, I don't. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said, but as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds, threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. And I knew then that it wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy came as a surprise, a happy one for Alex and me, a complicated one for everyone else. The day we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions. A pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're going to have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution as he gauged his mother's reaction. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." I was skeptical. Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations, but I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes and agreed. The night of the dinner, the house was buzzing with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, floating from guest to guest with a grace that felt almost genuine. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz," she said. "This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight, I hoped, would be different. The table was a feast, dishes upon dishes laid out, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up. You're eating for two now." I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, and met her gaze. There was a flicker of something there. Concern, or was it a challenge? "Thank you for letting me know," I said, putting the bread down. But the warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It seemed too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, and beneath it lay a trap, set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner in honor of our future baby was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, and there was a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. But my stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from fear. Every dish was a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital, or worse. As we all took our seats, the chatter around the table was lively, filled with the usual family gossip and stories. Jane was at the head of the table, presiding over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. "Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family," Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. There was a round of hear, hear, and applause. I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just being careful," I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it," she said, her voice tinged with a forced cheerfulness. "Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight," I said, avoiding the salad that I knew could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, the tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked. The room felt hot, the walls inching closer with each passing minute. Then came the cake. It was a beautiful confection, layers of sponge and cream that made the room ooh and ah. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. "For the mom-to-be," she said. I looked at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. "I really shouldn't," I said, "but it looks delicious." "Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby," Jane pressed, her voice sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, his hand swift as he knocked the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and a stunned silence fell over the room. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it. The room erupted in chaos. Jane's face was the picture of shock, but her eyes gave her away. There was a flash of something there. Fear, maybe? Guilt? Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. "Mom, did you know about this?" he demanded. Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And in that moment, the truth was as clear as the danger that had been on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Mom, is it true? Did you know?" Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane's eyes flickered with something dark before she regained her composure. "Of course not. I would never." Her voice trailed off, unconvincing. Mark wasn't having any of it. "I saw the shopping list, Jane. Peanut oil for cake. It was right there, in your handwriting," he said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. The murmurs around the table grew louder, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up from the family. Alex was shaking his head, his hands balled into fists. "How could you, Mom? Liz could have died." I was frozen in my seat, the gravity of the situation anchoring me down. This wasn't just carelessness or forgetfulness, it was intentional. Jane's mask finally slipped, her face twisted in anger. "I didn't want it to come to this, but she's not right for you, Alex. She's weak, and now she's bringing a child into this world who will be just like her." Alex took a step toward his mother, incredulous. "Weak? Liz is the strongest person I know. And you? How could you be so cruel?" I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to break down, to crumble under the weight of Jane's words. But I didn't. "Jane," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "you've made your feelings very clear. But this is not just about me. This is about a family, your grandchild." Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur. There were arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy family was shattered, all because of a peanut. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy, filled with things unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know, it's a lot to take in." He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. It's unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. Relatives wanted to express their shock, their support, their apologies. And through it all, there was a deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "Dad's left her. He can't get past what she did. He said it's been a long time coming." I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, sadness, pity? "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "He said she's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. And outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, We had each other. We were a team, about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger. The scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. And as for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together. In the heart of a quaint town, nestled among rolling hills and meandering streams, I grew up in a world far removed from the glitz and glamour of city life. Our small, weathered house, with its creaking wooden floors and windows offering views of sprawling fields, was a universe in itself. It was here, amidst the simplicity and warmth of family love, that my story began. My parents, though not affluent, were rich in kindness and wisdom. My father, a local carpenter, had hands that were roughened by years of labor, but gentle in touch, crafting not just furniture, but also instilling in me the values of hard work and humility. My mother, a schoolteacher, filled our home with books and stories, weaving tales that sparked my imagination and nurtured my dreams. Life in our small town was unhurried and unpretentious. Neighbors greeted each other with familiarity, and community events were the highlights of our social calendar. I cherished this life, finding joy in the small pleasures, the fresh scent of earth after rain, the rustling of leaves underfoot, and the chorus of birds at dawn. It was at the local library where I first encountered Mark. He was unlike anyone I had known, a visitor from the city, with an air of sophistication yet an unassuming nature. His family was well known in the business circles, their wealth and influence reaching far beyond the city's skyscrapers. But Mark, with his easy smile and genuine interest in my mundane tales, was a refreshing anomaly in that world. Our initial conversations were tentative, like two worlds cautiously orbiting each other. He spoke of city life, the fast pace, the endless opportunities, and the dazzling lights. I shared stories of my town, the annual harvest festival, the serene walks by the stream, and the close-knit community. In those early days, we would often meet at the old park bench by the lake, our conversations stretching for hours. The lake, with its placid waters reflecting the changing hues of the sky, bore witness to our growing connection, an invisible thread weaving our disparate worlds into one. "Anna," Mark said to me one evening, his voice tinged with a vulnerability I had not seen before. "I have always been surrounded by people who care more about wealth and status. But with you, I found a serenity that I didn't know existed. You've shown me a different way of life, one that's genuine and full of warmth." His words stirred something deep within me. "Mark, where we come from doesn't define us. It's who we are when we're together that matters. You've brought a new perspective into my life, opening my eyes to dreams I never dared to have." As our relationship deepened, Mark confided in me about his family, particularly his mother, a woman of elegance but stringent expectations. He spoke of her with respect, yet there was an underlying concern in his words. "She has her own ideas about who I should be with. I'm just worried about how she'll react to, well, to us." I reached out, taking his hand in mine, feeling the slight tremor. "We'll face that together," I assured him. "Love isn't about backgrounds or expectations. It's about two people who choose each other against all odds." The day Mark proposed was as unassuming as our love. No grand gestures, just a heartfelt promise of a life together. As I looked into his eyes, brimming with hope and love, I knew this was just the beginning. The evening I was set to meet Mark's family, my nerves were on edge. The grandeur of their mansion loomed large as we approached, a stark reminder of the different worlds Mark and I came from. Mark held my hand, giving me a reassuring look. "Just be yourself, Anna. That's all you need to be." I smiled weakly, trying to quell the rising anxiety. "I just hope your mom doesn't think I'm out of place." Mark sighed, a hint of concern in his eyes. "Mom can be a bit much. Just remember, I'm here with you." As we entered the opulent dining room, Mark's mother, Marion, a statuesque woman with an air of austerity, greeted us. Her eyes quickly took me in, a flicker of disapproval passing over her face. "So, this is the young lady who's captured my son's heart. Interesting choice, Mark." Dinner was an elaborate affair, the table set with dishes I couldn't even name. Mark's mother, ever the gracious host, offered me a plate with a sly smile. "I suppose these dishes might be a bit too sophisticated for your taste, Anna. We can get something simpler if you'd prefer." I felt a flush of embarrassment, but managed a polite decline. "No, thank you. I'm always eager to try new things." As the evening progressed, her comments grew more pointed. She eyed my dress, a simple but neat outfit I had thought was appropriate. "Is that what passes for evening wear in your town? It must be challenging to find good clothes on a modest budget." Mark jumped in, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere, but his mother was unrelenting. "Tell me, Anna, what do your parents do? It's always fascinating to learn about different walks of life." I answered, feeling the weight of her judgment. "My father is a carpenter, and my mother is a schoolteacher." "Oh, how quaint," she replied, her voice dripping with condescendence. "Hardworking people, I'm sure, but I suppose they couldn't offer you much in the way of a financial head start." The meal continued with her taking jabs at my small-town upbringing, my parents' humble occupations, and even my salary, which she had somehow learned about. Each comment was veiled in politeness, but sharp enough to cut. Mark was visibly uncomfortable, his attempts at defending me only seeming to amuse her more. As we left, Mark's father, Daniel, pulled me aside, offering a kind smile. "Anna, you handled yourself well. Don't let her get to you. She'll come around." In the car, Mark apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, Anna. I didn't think she'd be this harsh." I sighed, a mix of hurt and determination in my voice. "It's okay, Mark. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I love you, and that's what matters." That night, as I lay in bed, the sting of his mother's words lingered. But beneath the hurt, a resolve was building. This was more than just about fitting in. It was a test of our love and my strength, and I was ready to face it head-on. As the wedding day approached, the air was thick with excitement and, unfortunately, growing tension. Marion, who had taken it upon herself to oversee the preparations, seemed to find a peculiar pleasure in belittling my ideas and choices at every turn. One afternoon, while discussing the wedding plans with Mark and his mother, the topic of the wedding dress came up. I had chosen a simple yet elegant gown that I felt reflected my personality. Mark's mother, however, had other ideas. "That dress, Anna? It's so plain. Don't you want to make a statement on your big day? After all, you're marrying into the family," she said, her voice laced with a patronizing tone. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, giving me a supportive look. "Mom, Anna looks beautiful in that dress. It's her choice, and it's perfect." But his mother was relentless. "Oh, Mark, let's be realistic. This is a high-profile event. People expect a certain standard. Anna, dear, you should consider something more fitting of our family's status." I tried to keep my voice steady, though I felt a sting at her words. "I appreciate your concern, but I really love my dress. It's special to me." Her response was a dismissive wave. "Well, it's your day, I suppose. But remember, it's not just about you. It's about how you represent us, too." As the days went by, her comments became more frequent and cutting. Marion criticized the flower arrangements, the menu choices, even the invitations. Each remark was a subtle dig at my background and my inability to meet her lofty standards. Mark and I had many conversations about this, often late into the night. "I can't believe she's being so difficult," Mark would say, frustration evident in his voice. "I wish she could just see how amazing you are, how you make me happy." I would lie there, feeling his arms around me, a mix of love and sorrow in my heart. I knew it wouldn't be easy, marrying into your family, but I didn't expect it to be this hard. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within me. My parents and I had worked hard to make everything perfect, despite the constant criticisms from Marion. As I dressed in my simple but elegant gown, I hoped the day would pass without incident. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and heartfelt vows. Mark's eyes shone with affection and promise as we said our I do's. However, looming over the joyous occasion was the apprehension of the reception to follow, particularly the speeches. As expected, Marian took the microphone, her presence commanding the room's attention. The air was thick with expectation as she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, her voice loud and clear, "today we have gathered to witness the union of my son Mark with Anna, let's say, a person from a different circle." Whispers spread through the guests. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. She continued, her words sharp and unyielding. "While some may commend Mark for his charitable heart in lifting a beggar from the streets, we must be cautious. It's essential to keep our family's reputation and standards high, not let them be diluted by those who are clearly freeloaders, seeking to elevate their status by clinging to a family of higher standing." The room fell into a stunned silence. My parents looked at me, their faces a mix of shock and hurt. Mark's face was a mask of disbelief and anger. The guests, a mix of our friends and Mark's high society acquaintances, looked on uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. My heart sank, and a profound shame washed over me. Her words, so cruel in public, were more than just insults. They were a deliberate attempt to shame and belittle me in front of everyone we cared about. As she concluded her speech with a forced toast to our future, the applause was hesitant and muted. The room was enveloped in an awkward silence, the joy of the occasion marred by her venomous words. Mark stood up, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, Anna. This isn't what I wanted." His eyes were apologetic, filled with a mix of love and sorrow. I looked around at the shocked faces of our guests, feeling incredibly humiliated. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. The atmosphere at the reception was still tense following the disparaging speech by Mark's mother, when his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, a figure of respect and authority in the family, requested the microphone. Her poised demeanor and serious expression immediately drew the attention of all the guests. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and firm. "I have something important to say. Anna, you have faced unwarranted criticism today, criticism that no one deserves, especially not on their wedding day." I looked up in surprise, and Mark, beside me, appeared equally astonished. Mrs. Eleanor then turned towards Marian. "It seems we have forgotten our own past and where we come from. Let me remind everyone here, especially you, that before you were the lady of this house, you were a maid working under this very roof. It was here that you met your husband." A hush fell over the room. Mark's mother's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in shock and embarrassment. Mrs. Eleanor continued, her tone unyielding. "So, for a former maid to stand here and scorn someone for their humble beginnings and modest means is not only ironic, but deeply hypocritical." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The room was engulfed in a stunned silence, every guest hanging on to Mrs. Eleanor's every word. You, who rose from poverty, should be the last person to judge or belittle another based on their background. We should be proud of Anna's integrity and strength, not deride her for it. The guests shifted uncomfortably, and whispers began to circulate. Marian sat motionless, the impact of Mrs. Eleanor's words evident on her face. In this family, we value character over wealth, kindness over status. Anna exemplifies these values, and I am proud to welcome her into our family, Mrs. Eleanor concluded, her gaze softening as she looked at me. The room erupted into applause, a stark contrast to the earlier muted response. Marian sat there, completely humbled, her earlier arrogance replaced by a visible sense of shame. To be honest, I didn't feel sorry for her. Mark whispered to me, "I never expected Grandma to stand up for us like this." I squeezed his hand, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. "She's amazing." The rest of the evening felt lighter, the air cleared by Mrs. Eleanor's candid defense. Guests approached with warm congratulations and sincere smiles. I felt that they were all on my side. It felt damn good. As we left the reception, hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of confidence and belonging. Mrs. Eleanor's words had shifted the dynamics, breaking the insidious plan of a cruel and not the smartest woman. The days after the wedding were heavy with an unspoken tension that hung over Mark's family like a dense fog. It all came to a head during a family meeting at Mrs. Eleanor's house, where the air was thick with expectation and apprehension. As we gathered in the grand living room, Mrs. Eleanor began without preamble, her voice firm and unwavering. "What happened at the wedding cannot be overlooked. The way you spoke to Anna, it was disgraceful." She addressed Marian directly, her eyes sharp. Mark's mother, usually so composed, looked smaller somehow, her usual confidence diminished. "Eleanor, I've already apologized to Anna," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of defiance. "It's not just about an apology," Mrs. Eleanor retorted. "Your actions reflect on this entire family. You've become accustomed to a lifestyle funded by the family's money without appreciating its value." Mark's father nodded in agreement, his expression serious. "My mother is right. You've lost sight of what's important." Mrs. Eleanor then laid out her decision, each word deliberate and clear. "I've decided to cut off the financial support you've been receiving. It's time you start contributing to this family instead of just taking. You'll need to find a job and learn to live within your means." The shock on Marian's face was evident. She turned to her husband, seeking support. "You can't agree with this? She can't just cut me off like this." But Daniel surprised her. "I stand with my mother on this. You've gone too far this time. It's for your own good." Marian's eyes filled with anger and disbelief, her usual poise crumbling under the weight of her new reality. Mark, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice steady. "Mom, Grandma's decision is harsh, but it's fair. You need to understand the impact of your words and actions." I sat there, watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of sympathy and relief. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. The meeting ended with Mark's mother in a state of shock, the reality of her situation slowly sinking in. She was obviously used to living at the expense of her family, and all thoughts of work caused her a migraine. I could barely contain a chuckle. As we left, Mark leaned in close. "I never thought I'd see the day when Mom would be at a loss for words, but maybe this is what she needs to change." I nodded, feeling a cautious hope for the future. Perhaps this will be a new beginning for her, for all of us. The family reckoning had been tough but necessary. It was a pivotal moment that promised to reshape the dynamics within Mark's family, hopefully for the better. The honeymoon was a welcome escape for Mark and me. As we walked along the sandy beaches, the soothing sound of the waves provided a much-needed respite from the recent family turmoil. One evening, as we watched the sunset, Mark wrapped his arm around me. "I'm sorry our wedding turned into such a drama, Anna. I wish things had been different." I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "It's okay, Mark. It wasn't your fault. What matters is we're together now, away from all that stress." Mark sighed, looking out over the ocean. "Yeah, but when we go back, we'll have to face the reality of my mom's situation. It's going to be tough for her." I nodded, understanding his concern. Maybe this will be a chance for her to grow, to see things from a different perspective. We spent our days exploring and our nights talking about our future. The challenges we had faced seemed to strengthen our bond, reaffirming our love to each other. On our last night, as we packed our bags, Mark looked thoughtful. "You know, Anna, everything that happened, it made me realize how important you are to me. I can't imagine going through life with anyone else." I smiled, touched by his words. "I feel the same, Mark. We've been through a lot, but it's only made our relationship stronger. We can handle whatever comes our way, as long as we're together." As we headed back home, I felt a sense of peace. The honeymoon had not only been a break from the chaos, but a time for us to solidify our bond, to prepare ourselves for the new chapter in our lives. We were returning to a changed reality, but we were doing it together, stronger and more united than ever. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with Mark by my side. Coming back from our honeymoon, Mark and I were unsure of what awaited us at his family home. The car ride was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts about the new family dynamics. As we arrived, the first thing we noticed was the absence of Mark's mother. Inside, we we were greeted by his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, who wore a knowing smile. "Welcome back, you two. I suppose you're wondering about the changes here," she said, her tone light but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "Yes, where's Mom?" Mark asked, looking around. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath, her smile still in place. "Well, after you left, Marion caused quite a scene. Demanded that I restore her financial support. When I refused, she decided to leave. She's now living in a small apartment and, from what I hear, is looking for a job." Mark and I exchanged glances, the news sinking in. It was a drastic change from the luxurious life she was used to. "And there's more," Mrs. Eleanor continued, leaning in as if to share a secret. "Your father is considering a divorce. He's had enough of her antics. Seems like she finally pushed him too far. Well, she brought it upon herself." Mark's expression was one of shock mixed with a hint of relief. "I can't believe it. I mean, I knew things would change, but this is more than I expected." I reached out, touching his arm. "It's a lot to take in, but maybe this is for the best. A chance for everyone to start fresh, on a more honest footing." Dinner that night was an oddly serene affair. The absence of Mark's mother felt, but not in the way we had anticipated. The conversation was more open, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was a real sense of family. As we drove home later that evening, Mark was pensive. "I always hoped for a change, but I didn't expect it to happen like this. It's going to be a big adjustment for Mom." I nodded. "It's a tough situation, but maybe it's a necessary step for her to grow. And for your dad, too, to find some peace." The ride home was reflective, both of us contemplating the new reality we were returning to. The family we left before the honeymoon was not the same one we were coming back to. It was a sobering thought, but in many ways, a hopeful one. Change, though painful at times, was often the path to something better. And we were ready to face it together. My name is Rachel, and this is my story. Growing up, my life was all about church, family, and the simple truths my parents held dear. My dad, Thomas, was a deacon, and my mom, Mary, led the women's group. I always tried to be the good daughter they wanted. I wore modest dresses, sang in the choir, and never missed a Sunday service. But life at home wasn't just prayers and Bible study. It was also filled with the constant tug-of-war between my parents and my older brother, David. David was different. He had this fire in him, a passion for music that didn't fit into our parents' world. I remember him as a kid, always tapping rhythms on the kitchen table, eyes alive with dreams bigger than our small town. Then came his teenage years, and with it, the electric guitar. He was a natural, and soon he formed a band. They called themselves Rebels Echo. It was like a declaration of his new life, away from the expectations of our parents. Our parents didn't understand. They saw his music as a path away from faith. "He's lost," they'd say with a sigh. I'd sit there, listening, feeling torn between loyalty to my family and the love for my brother. Despite their disapproval, David and I stayed close. We'd talk on the phone late at night, him sharing stories of his gigs, me whispering about life at home. He was my window to a world beyond our small town, a world I yearned to explore, but never dared to. Then came Michael, my husband, or as I thought back then, the love of my life. He was older, a friend of a friend from church. Michael was everything my parents admired, kind, successful, and deeply religious. We dated briefly, and before I knew it, there was a ring on my finger and a promise of forever. Our wedding was beautiful, but bittersweet. David wasn't there. Mom and Dad insisted, and I, as always, didn't argue. Michael held my hand, his smile warm, but my heart ached for my brother. As we exchanged vows, I couldn't help but feel a part of my world was missing. After the wedding, we moved into Michael's house. It was a cozy place, filled with the promise of a happy future. But as I unpacked my things, I couldn't shake off the feeling of something missing. I remember Michael noticing my distant look. "Everything okay, Rachel?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. "Yeah, just thinking about David," I replied, forcing a smile. "He's made his choices, Rachel. We need to focus on our life, our future," he said, a hint of firmness in his voice. I nodded, knowing he was right. But deep down, I couldn't let go of the bond I shared with my brother, no matter how far our paths had diverged. The first few months of marriage felt like a dream. Michael was attentive and caring, always making sure I was happy. Our days were filled with shared laughter and long talks into the night. He'd often surprise me with small gifts or a bouquet of flowers, just because. "Morning, beautiful." He'd greet me every day with a kiss, his eyes sparkling with affection. "Good morning," I'd reply, my heart fluttering with happiness. We'd spend weekends exploring nearby towns, trying out little diners, and walking hand in hand by the riverside. Everything felt perfect, like a life I had only imagined in my dreams. But as time passed, I began to feel a bit restless. I loved being with Michael, but there was a part of me that wanted more than just being a housewife. Back in college, I had dreams of becoming a teacher. I missed learning, being around people, and feeling like I was contributing to something. One evening, while Michael was reading in the living room, I gathered the courage to bring it up. "Michael, can we talk about something?" I asked, sitting next to him. "Of course, what's on your mind?" he replied, putting his book down. "I've been thinking, maybe I could look for a job, or at least some volunteer work. I want to do something more with my time," I said hesitantly. He looked at me, surprised. "But Rachel, you don't need to work. I'm here to take care of everything. Isn't this what you always wanted?" I paused, not wanting to upset him. "I know, and I appreciate that. But I need something of my own, you know? Something that makes me feel fulfilled." Michael sighed, taking my hand. "I just want you to be happy, Rachel. But think about our future, our plans for a family. Don't you think your place is here with me, building that future?" I understood his point, but it didn't sit right with me. Still, I didn't want to argue. "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it," I said, forcing a smile. As days turned into weeks, I tried to push those thoughts aside. I focused on being the best wife I could be, cooking meals, keeping the house tidy, and supporting Michael. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself, the part that yearned for independence and a sense of purpose outside our home. Despite these creeping doubts, our life together seemed good on the surface. We were the ideal couple in everyone's eyes. But as the months rolled by, changes in our home became more noticeable. Michael, once so attentive and present, started coming home late, often missing dinner. At first, he would apologize, citing work pressure and important projects. "Sorry, Rachel, work's a nightmare right now. I hope you understand," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. I tried to be understanding. "It's okay, Michael. Work is important. Just don't overdo it, okay?" But deep down, I felt lonely and neglected. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt empty and quiet. I found myself often sitting by the window, waiting for him to come home. One evening, when Michael came home later than usual, I decided to address the growing distance between us. "Michael, we need to talk," I started as he walked through the door. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes. "What is it now, Rachel?" I hesitated, taken aback by his tone. "It's just, you've been coming home late a lot. I miss spending time with you." He sighed, dropping his keys on the table. "Rachel, I'm working hard for us, for our future. You should be grateful, not complaining." I felt a sting at his words. I am grateful, but I also miss my husband. Is it wrong to want to spend time together? Michael's face hardened. "Look, I'm doing my best here. Maybe you should find some hobbies or something to keep you busy." His words hurt, but I swallowed the pain. "Maybe you're right," I murmured, even though it felt wrong. The conversations became less frequent after that. Michael grew more distant, and I felt more isolated. I started questioning everything, our marriage, my role as a wife, and my own happiness. It felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. One day, I was cleaning the house and found a receipt for a restaurant in Michael's coat pocket. It was dated for a night he said he'd been working late. My heart sank. Confronting him seemed daunting, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I brought it up. "Michael, I found a receipt in your coat. It was for the night you said you were working late," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. So? I grabbed a bite after work. What's the big deal? It's not that. It's just, you never mentioned it. Are you sure there's nothing else I should know? I asked, hoping for honesty. Michael's response was quick and sharp. Rachel, you're being paranoid. I'm tired of this constant questioning. Can't a man have some peace in his own home? I recoiled at his words, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. Was I wrong to question him? But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me. Feeling the growing distance in our marriage, I knew I needed something to fill the void. The idea of getting a job or doing something meaningful was still on my mind. It was a scary thought, going against Michael's wishes, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I needed this for myself. One morning, after Michael left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I started looking for job openings. There were a few that caught my eye, but one in particular stood out, a teaching assistant position at a local community center. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I hesitated for a moment before applying. My heart was racing. This was it, my first real step towards something of my own. When I hit the submit button, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. A few days later, I got a call. They wanted to interview me. I was over the moon, but also nervous about how Michael would react. I decided to keep it to myself until I knew more. The interview went well, and they offered me the position. I was ecstatic. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. But the thought of telling Michael dampened my excitement. That evening, when Michael came home, I gathered all my courage. Michael, I have something to tell you, I started, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his expression tired. What is it now, Rachel? I got a job, as a teaching assistant. It's just part-time, I said quickly, almost in a whisper. Michael's reaction was not what I expected. He just stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. Do what you want, Rachel. I don't have the energy to argue about this. I was taken aback by his indifference. Part of me had hoped he would see this as a positive step, but it seemed he didn't care. Despite his reaction, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. The job was rewarding, and I loved interacting with the children and other staff. It was a breath of fresh air, a break from the loneliness and tension at home. With each day at the community center, I felt more confident and independent. It was a small job, but it meant the world to me. It gave me something to look forward to, something that was just mine. But at home, things with Michael were deteriorating. He was home even less, and when he was, we barely spoke. The once warm and loving man I married was now just a stranger passing by in the hallway. The day of our wedding anniversary was bittersweet. The house buzzed with preparations, yet Michael was nowhere to be seen, supposedly tied up with work. My parents fluttered around, trying to make everything perfect, their efforts casting a shadow over the hollow feeling in my heart. Then, in the midst of the controlled chaos, David arrived, his presence like a burst of fresh air. He strode in, carrying not just his charismatic aura, but also his laptop, brimming with stories from his life on the road. David, what are you doing here? My mother's voice was sharp, laced with disapproval. I couldn't miss Rachel's big day, could I? David replied, his tone light yet defiant. Ignoring the tension, David turned to me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Got something to show you, sis. You won't believe the parties and the people I've met. We sat down in a quiet corner, and he flipped open his laptop. As he scrolled through photos of crowded stages, vibrant parties, and smiling faces, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. These were glimpses into a world so different from mine. Then, in a casual swipe, everything changed. There he was, Michael. In the midst of a raucous party, with a woman clinging to his arm, laughing, carefree, and so very unlike the man I knew. Wait, who's that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to Michael in the photo. David glanced at the screen, nonchalant. Oh, him! That's just some guy who's been hanging out with us a lot. Real ladies' man, changes girls like he changes guitar strings. Says he's got a boring and stupid wife at home. His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Boring. Stupid. Was that how Michael saw me? Before I could process it all, the front door swung open. Michael walked in. His usual mask of composure shattered the moment he saw David. "David, what the hell are you doing here?" Michael's voice was laced with a panic. David looked up, surprise and realization dawning on his face. "Wait a minute. You're the husband? This is your Mike?" The room fell silent. My parents, unaware of the storm brewing, looked on in confusion. Michael's eyes darted between me and David, the color draining from his face. I held up the laptop, the image of him at the party glaring back at us. "Is this what you do on your late nights at work, Michael? Is this who you really are?" Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was answer enough. The room spun around me. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, felt like they were closing in. Betrayal, lies, the facade of our perfect marriage. It all crumbled down in that moment. David stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, a silent pillar of support. My parents were still trying to grasp the situation, their expressions shifting from shock to disappointment. The silence in the room was deafening after David's revelation. I stood there, holding the photo, feeling like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. My parents were staring at Michael, waiting for an explanation. Michael's eyes were fixed on the floor. "Michael, is this true?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and regret. "Rachel, I can explain." "Explain? How do you explain this?" I said, my voice rising as I waved the photo. "It was just a mistake, Rachel. It meant nothing. I was just confused," Michael stammered. "A mistake? Confused? For how long have you been lying to me?" My voice was shaking with anger and hurt. "Rachel, please, let's talk about this privately," he pleaded, glancing nervously at my parents and David. "No, Michael, I deserve to know the truth. Here and now," I insisted. My mom stepped forward, her face filled with concern. "Rachel, maybe you two should—" "No, Mom, I need answers," I interrupted, my gaze still fixed on Michael. David was quiet, his expression somber. He put a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. Michael took a deep breath. "It started a few months ago. I was feeling overwhelmed, and she was there. It was a stupid mistake. I love you, Rachel." His words felt like a slap in the face. Love? How could he call this love? "I can't believe this. All those late nights, the times you weren't here." "It was all a lie," I said, the reality of his betrayal sinking in. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "But you did, Michael. You broke our vows. You broke my trust," I replied, tears streaming down my face. My dad spoke up, his voice stern. "You need to leave, Michael. Now." Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my heart. The room was quiet again. My mom came over and hugged me, her embrace warm but unable to comfort the ache in my heart. David stood beside me, his presence a reminder of the family that still stood with me. I felt broken, the illusions of my perfect marriage shattered into a million pieces. But amidst the pain, there was a flicker of something else, a sense of clarity. The truth was out, and now I had to find a way to pick up the pieces and rebuild my life, a life that was mine and mine alone. The days following the revelation were a blur. My parents tried to comfort me, but their words felt distant. David stayed by my side, a silent guardian, his presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. I knew what I had to do. The decision was clear, even through the fog of my pain. I needed to end my marriage with Michael. It wasn't just about his betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. Sitting at the kitchen table, David broke the silence. "You okay, sis?" I looked up, my eyes tired. "I will be. I need to start the divorce process. I can't stay in this marriage." David nodded. "I'm here for you, whatever you need." Meetings with lawyers were emotionally draining. I sat across from Michael at our final meeting, his face filled with remorse. "Rachel, I am so sorry. I never wanted things to end this way," he said, his voice low. "I know, but sorry isn't enough, Michael. You broke our trust, and I need to move on, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He nodded, looking defeated. I just wish I could make things right. Some things can't be undone, I said, signing the last of the papers. Walking out of that office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I was free from the lies, the deceit. But with that freedom came the realization of my new reality. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life. The following weeks were a time of self-reflection. I spent hours talking with David, who shared his own stories of heartbreak and healing. My parents, though still struggling with their own feelings about the divorce, offered their support. One evening, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, Mom spoke up. Rachel, we're here for you. You're strong, and you'll get through this. Dad nodded in agreement. You've always been our rock, even when we didn't see it. We're proud of you. Their words, simple and sincere, touched me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I also threw myself into my work at the community center. The children's laughter and innocence were a balm to my wounded heart. I found joy in small moments, a smile from a child, a successful lesson, a thank you from a parent. In the midst of the fallout, I discovered a resilience within me that I didn't know existed. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt overwhelmed by loneliness and doubt. But I kept moving forward, driven by a newfound determination to live a life that was true to myself. Sitting in the small corner cafe, I cradled a warm cup of coffee, my mind drifting back through the whirlwind of recent events. The steam from the coffee blurred with my thoughts, each memory unfolding like a scene from a distant play. I remembered the day in court, the final decree of our divorce. Michael had sat there, a shadow of the man I once knew. He looked pathetic, his eyes void of the confidence he once carried. It was a stark contrast to the man I married, a sight that stirred a mix of pity and relief in me. Then came the tedious, bitter process of dividing our assets. Michael, who once professed undying love, was now coldly squabbling over every cent. It was a tedious and painful process, stripping away any lingering sentiments I had for the marriage we shared. Perhaps the most vivid memory was the last time I saw Michael. He had come to my doorstep, unannounced, his eyes red and swollen. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, pleading for a second chance. I stood there, watching him, feeling nothing but contempt. The tears, the pleas, they meant nothing. They were just the last desperate acts of a man who had lost everything through his own doing. Through all these moments, David was my pillar of strength. He was there in the courtroom, offering silent support with his presence. And on that final encounter with Michael, David stood by my side, a protective force against the man who had broken my trust. As I sat in the cafe, the noise of the bustling city around me, I realized how much I had changed. The naive girl who entered that marriage was gone, replaced by a woman who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. I felt a sense of pride in my newfound independence and resilience. My gaze shifted to the busy street outside the cafe window. People were going about their lives, each absorbed in their own stories. I felt a kinship with them, a shared understanding of the struggles and triumphs life brings. I took a sip of my coffee, its warmth spreading through me. I was starting over, but this time on my own terms. There was a future out there waiting for me, filled with possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready to embrace it, with my past as a lesson and my brother's support as my strength.
My name is Emily, and I'm just your average 29-year-old woman living alone in a small, cozy apartment. Today, I'm sitting at my dining table, staring at the phone. It's been ringing on and off for the past hour, but I can't bring myself to answer it. It's Mark, my fiancé, wanting to talk about meeting my parents. The thought alone makes my stomach turn. Mark's voice comes through the voicemail again. Hey, Em, just checking in. We really should plan on meeting your folks soon. Call me back, okay? I let out a sigh and look around my apartment. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. The walls are lined with bookshelves, and a small balcony overlooks the city. It's my little haven, far away from the memories of my childhood. Growing up wasn't easy. My dad left us when I was 5. I still remember the day he walked out, suitcase in hand, not even a backward glance. Mom changed after that. She became distant, cold, and often angry. And somehow, I always seemed to be the target of her frustration. 2 years after Dad left, Mom remarried. My stepdad, Rick, was actually a decent guy. He tried to make things better, but Mom's attention was all on my little half-sister, Lily. Lily was everything I wasn't, or at least that's how Mom made it seem. She was showered with love and affection, while I was just there. I was snapped out of my thoughts by another call. It was Mark again. I finally picked up. "Hey, Mark," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Emily, I've been trying to reach you. So, when can we plan to meet your parents?" Mark's voice was full of excitement, oblivious to my hesitation. I'm not sure, Mark. It's complicated," I replied, fiddling with a pen on the table. "What's complicated?" "It's just dinner, Em. I really want to meet the people who raised my incredible fiancé." I let out a forced laugh. "You wouldn't say that if you knew my mom. She's a lot to handle." Mark went silent for a moment. "Is everything okay, Em? You know you can tell me anything." I took a deep breath. "It's just that my mom and we don't really have the best relationship. She's always been hard on me. It's nothing like your family." Mark's voice softened. "I'm here for you, Emily. We'll figure this out together. Maybe it's time to face this, you know?" I knew he was right, but the thought of facing my mom, of exposing Mark to her sharp tongue and cold demeanor, terrified me. "Yeah, maybe," I said, not entirely convinced. "Let's talk about it later. I need some time to think." "Okay, Em. I love you. You know that, right?" "I know, Mark. I love you too." Sitting in my apartment, my mind wanders back to those early years after Dad left. They were tough, to say the least. Mom's whole world seemed to crumble, and her heartache turned into anger that was often directed at me. I remember one particularly hard day. I was 7, trying to do my homework at the kitchen table. Mom was pacing around, her face tight with worry and frustration. "Emily, can't you see I'm busy? Stop making that racket with your pencil," she snapped suddenly. I looked up, startled. "Sorry, Mom," I mumbled, trying to be quieter. It wasn't long after that when Mom met Rick. He was different, kind, and gentle. But Mom changed when she was with him. She seemed happier, but that happiness never really reached me. When Lily was born, it was like I became invisible. One evening, I overheard Mom talking to Rick in the living room. I wasn't meant to hear, but I did. "She's just so difficult, Rick. Nothing like Lily. I don't know what to do with her." Mom's voice was full of frustration. I felt my heart sink. Even then, I knew she was talking about me. Rick tried to reason with her. "She's just a kid, Helen. She needs your love, not your disappointment." But Mom wouldn't listen. "She reminds me too much of him," she said bitterly. That night, I cried myself to sleep. It was clear I wasn't the daughter she wanted. As I got older, the gap between us only widened. When I was around 10, I remember trying to show Mom a drawing I'd done in school. "Look, Mom, I got an A on this," I said, holding up my artwork. She barely glanced at it. "That's nice, dear. Go show Rick. I'm busy." But Rick was different. He took one look at my drawing and smiled. "This is fantastic, Emily. You're really talented." I remember how warm his praise felt, but it couldn't fill the void left by Mom's indifference. Those years were a blur of feeling like I didn't belong, like I was an outsider in my own home. Mom was always quick to point out my flaws, especially as I hit my teenage years. It was a constant stream of, "Don't slouch," "That outfit is unflattering," or "Why can't you be more like Lily?" My teenage years were like navigating a minefield, always cautious, trying not to set off another round of criticism or disapproval from Mom. I was 15 when the weight of her words really started to bear down on me. One evening, I was getting ready for a school dance. I had picked out a dress I thought looked pretty good on me. I twirled in front of the mirror in my room, feeling a rare moment of confidence. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" I called out, stepping into the living room. Mom looked up from her magazine, her eyes scanning me up and down. "You're wearing that? It's a bit snug, don't you think? You should really watch your weight." Her words hit me like a slap. I thought it looked okay," I stammered, my confidence shattering. Mom sighed, standing up. "Let me do your hair. Maybe it'll draw attention away from your figure." I sat there in silence, feeling small and ashamed, as she roughly pulled my hair into a style. School wasn't much of an escape either. One day, I was sitting with a few classmates at lunch, talking about our families. "So, Emily, what's your mom like?" one of the girls, Sarah, asked casually. I hesitated, not sure how to answer. She's strict, very particular about things." Sarah seemed to sense the tension in my voice. "Hey, it's okay. Moms can be tough. Mine's always on my case about grades." I forced a smile, appreciating her attempt to relate, but inside, I felt that my situation was different, more isolating. Back at home, things got even more strained when I started to show interest in boys. One time, I had a guy from school, Jake, come over to study. He was nice, funny, and I kind of liked him. We were in the living room, working on a project, when Mom walked in. She gave Jake a cold look before turning to me. "Emily, make sure you're actually studying and not distracting the boy with your silly crushes," she said, loud enough for Jake to hear. I was mortified. Jake looked uncomfortable, and the air was filled with awkwardness. After he left, I confronted Mom. "Why did you have to say that in front of Jake? It was so embarrassing." Mom shrugged, unfazed. "I'm just stating the obvious, Emily. Besides, boys like him aren't interested in girls with your build." Her words stung deeply, and from that point on, I was even more cautious about bringing friends, especially boys, home. During those years, I often sought refuge in Rick, my stepdad. He was always kinder, more understanding. One evening, when Mom was out, I opened up to him. "Rick, do you think I'm unattractive?" I asked hesitantly. Rick looked surprised. "Emily, you're beautiful. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise, not even your mom." By the time I hit my early 20s, my experiences with Mom had left a deep imprint on my confidence, especially when it came to relationships. I was always second-guessing myself, wondering if I was good enough. I remember dating a guy named Alex during college. He was sweet and seemed to genuinely like me. One day, I decided to introduce him to my family, despite my reservations about Mom. We were having dinner at my parents' house. Rick was his usual welcoming self, but Mom was another story. She had this way of giving backhanded compliments that could cut you down to seize. "So Alex, what are you studying?" Mom asked, passing the salad. "Engineering," Alex replied, smiling. "I'm hoping to get into renewable energy projects after graduation." "That's ambitious. Hopefully you're not biting off more than you can chew, like some people." Mom glanced at me as she said this, an obvious jab at my past academic struggles. I felt my face heat up with embarrassment. Alex seemed to sense the tension, but tried to keep the conversation light. The evening went downhill from there. Every time I said something, Mom found a way to twist it into a criticism. When Alex and I were leaving, I apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry about that, Alex. My mom can be difficult." Alex squeezed my hand. "Hey, it's not your fault, but it does make things a bit complicated, doesn't it?" I knew what he meant. The relationship eventually fizzled out. It wasn't just about that night, but it was a pattern. My insecurity, fueled by Mom's constant belittling, made it hard to maintain a healthy relationship. Fast forward a few years, and I met Mark. He was different, kind, patient, and he had a way of making me feel valued. But the scars from my past were always lurking beneath the surface. One evening, we were at my apartment, talking about our future. "Emily, I love you, and I want us to have a future together," Mark said, holding my hands. "I love you too, Mark, but I'm scared. My past, my mom, it's all so messy. I don't want to drag you into my issues." Mark looked into my eyes. "Your past doesn't define us. Yes, it's part of you, but it doesn't have to dictate our future. We'll face it together." The day of the dinner with my parents had me tangled in nerves. Mark, always optimistic, tried to ease my anxiety as we drove to my parents' house. "It's just dinner, Emily. It'll be okay," he reassured me, but my stomach churned with unease. We were greeted at the door by Rick, his warm smile a small comfort. "Emily, Mark, welcome. Come on in," he said cheerfully. Mom was in the kitchen, and as I saw her, I felt a familiar tension grip me. She managed a polite smile for Mark, but her eyes were distant. "Dinner's nearly ready. Why don't you both sit down?" she said, gesturing towards the dining table. The atmosphere was strained as we all sat down. Rick tried to lighten the mood, engaging Mark in conversation. "So, Mark, what do you do for a living?" Mark, unaware of the undercurrents, answered cheerfully. "I actually own a company. We specialize in environmental consulting." I saw a flicker of something in Mom's eyes at his response. Was it interest? Or maybe even greed? It was hard to tell. "That sounds impressive," Mom said, her tone suddenly more amicable. "A company owner, no less. You must be doing quite well for yourself." Her words had an edge, and I felt a familiar pang of discomfort. The rest of the dinner progressed tensely, with Mom alternating between subtly belittling me and praising my younger sister Lily, who wasn't even present. Every now and then, she would direct the conversation back to Mark, asking about his business and future plans. Each time, I saw that same glint in her eyes, like she was assessing his worth, not just as a person, but for what he could offer. As we left that evening, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. The ride home was quiet until Mark broke the silence. "Your mom seems interested in my business. A bit too interested, maybe?" I sighed, feeling drained. "Yeah, she has a way of evaluating people." "I'm sorry, Mark. This is just how it's always been." Mark squeezed my hand, his support unwavering. "We're in this together, Emily. Remember that." The next morning, after the dinner, I was still reeling from Mom's comments when Mark's phone rang. It was an unknown number. I watched as his expression changed from curiosity to shock. "Hang on. What did you just say?" Mark asked, his voice rising in disbelief. I could hear a faint, muffled voice on the other end, but couldn't make out the words. Mark hung up, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "That was your mom," he said, looking at me. She just proposed something outrageous." I felt a cold shiver down my spine. "What are you talking about, Mark?" He took a deep breath. "She suggested that I should leave you and consider marrying Lily instead." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "She said what?" Mark nodded, his face grim. "She said that you weren't right for me and that Lily would be a better fit. She was serious, Emily." I was speechless. The idea that my own mother would go to such lengths was beyond belief. "We need to do something about this," Mark said, his jaw set. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about exposing her for who she really is." I nodded, a mix of anger and determination building inside me. "We could record her saying it, catch her in the act." Mark agreed. "Let's do it. Let's show everyone her true colors." The plan was set. Mark would call my mom back, expressing interest in her proposal, and we would record the conversation. That evening, we sat in my living room, the phone on speaker. Mark dialed my mom's number, and I hit record on my phone. "Hello, Helen. It's Mark," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Mark, darling, I'm so glad you called back. Have you thought about what I suggested?" Mom's voice was sickly sweet. Mark played along. "Yes, I have. It's an interesting idea. But I need to know, why do you think Emily isn't right for me?" There was a pause, then Mom replied, "Oh, Mark, you're such a catch. You deserve someone better, someone like Lily. Emily has always been a bit of a disappointment." My heart ached hearing those words, but I stayed silent, letting the recording continue. "We should meet and discuss this further. Maybe over coffee?" Mark suggested. "That sounds wonderful. Let's do it. I'll arrange a time and place," Mom replied, her voice dripping with eagerness. After hanging up, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, anger, betrayal. But there was also a sense of purpose. We had a plan, and it was time to expose Mom's true nature. The next few days were a blur of planning and apprehension. Mark and I were going to catch my mom in her own game. He arranged to meet her at a cafe downtown, and I decided to be there, disguised, so I could see everything for myself. On the day of their meeting, I wore a wig and oversized sunglasses, looking like someone completely different. I sat at a table with a clear view of them, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark arrived first, taking a seat at a table near the window. A few minutes later, Mom showed up, looking around before spotting Mark and walking over with a confident smile. "Mark, so good to see you," she said, sitting down. "Thanks for meeting me, Helen," Mark replied. "So, about your proposal..." Mom leaned in, her voice low. "I think it's for the best, Mark. Emily is not suitable for you. Lily, on the other hand, is perfect. She's everything Emily isn't." I felt a lump in my throat, listening to her words. Mark glanced in my direction, giving a subtle nod to indicate the recorder was on. "But why are you so against Emily?" Mark asked, playing his part perfectly. Mom sighed. "Between us, I never wanted Emily. Her father left, and she just reminds me of all the bad times. Lily is my real daughter, the one I actually care about." My hands were shaking under the table. Hearing Mom's words, so cold and heartless, was like a knife twisting in my gut. Mark changed the topic, discussing random things to keep the conversation going while the recorder captured every word. After about 30 minutes, they wrapped up, with Mom looking pleased with herself. As soon as Mom left, I removed my disguise and joined Mark. "I can't believe she said those things," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. Mark took my hands. "I'm so sorry, Emily, but now we have proof. What do you want to do with it?" I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. "We expose her, Mark, at the next family gathering. Everyone needs to know the truth." Mark nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll do it together. It's time everyone saw the real Helen." We left the cafe with a plan in mind, a plan to finally reveal my mom's true colors to everyone, especially to Rick, who had been in the dark for far too long. The tension was thick in the air as we all gathered at my parents' house for what was supposed to be a routine family dinner. Little did everyone know, Mark and I had a revelation planned that would change everything. As we sat down to eat, my mom, with a triumphant look in her eyes, couldn't hold back. "Emily, I have some news. Mark has seen the light. He's left you and is now interested in your sister, Lily." Lily's smile broadened across her face, a mirror image of Mom's smug expression. Rick, sitting beside them, looked absolutely shocked, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about, Helen?" Rick asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Before Mom could elaborate, Mark caught my eye and winked subtly. It was our cue. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. The room fell silent as the recording of Mom's conversation with Mark filled the air. "I never wanted Emily. Her father left, and she just reminds me of all the bad times. Lily is my real daughter, the one I actually care about. As the recording continued, Mom's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock. Rick looked at her, disbelief etched on his face. What is this, Emily?" Rick stammered, his voice filled with hurt. I looked directly at Mom. "That's you, talking to Mark, telling him to leave me for Lily, telling him how little you think of me." Mom tried to interrupt. "Emily, this is nonsense. You're just trying to—" "No, Mom," I cut her off, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "For once, you're going to listen. I only married Rick out of desperation. If I hadn't had Emily, I could have found someone richer, smarter, more promising. She's always been a burden." As the recording ended, the room was heavy with silence. Rick turned to Mom, his expression a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "Helen, is this true? Did you really say these things?" Rick asked, his voice trembling. Mom was at a loss for words, her usual composure shattered. Rick stood up, pushing his chair back. "I can't believe this. All these years, I had no idea." He looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I had no idea." Mom finally found her voice, but it was weak, defensive. "Rick, I didn't mean it. It was just talk." But Rick wasn't having it. "No, Helen, this is unforgivable. I need to think about all of this." He left the room quickly, leaving a heavy silence behind. Mom broke down, sobbing, her usual composed demeanor shattered. Lily sat frozen, her eyes darting between Mom and the door where Rick had exited. Mark took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You did the right thing, Emily." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It's over. It's finally over. In the following weeks, Rick filed for divorce. I didn't speak to Mom or Lily again. It was painful, but it was a necessary closure. Mark and I got married in a small ceremony. Rick was there, smiling through his tears. He was the only family I needed. As I stood there with Mark, I realized that I was finally free from the shadows of my past. I had found love, not just with Mark, but within myself. For the first time in my life, I felt truly happy and at peace.